name was Lord Commander Solar Macarius, and his legend shines brighter than any in 1,000 years. Macarius was no transhuman primarch or super soldier. He was a mortal man, a general of the Imperial Guard. Yet he would come to be ranked alongside the greatest military heroes in human history. In just 7 years of relentless warfare, Macarius reconquered nearly 1,000 lost worlds for the Imperium, extending the Emperor's light to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. He was hailed as a savior and later canonized as a saint. But his story is no simple fable of unbroken triumph. It is a tale of colossal ambition and hubris, of glory hard-won and tragedy endured. A man who defeated every external enemy, yet ultimately was halted by the limits of those around him and by the dark pragmatism of the Imperium he served. Macarius was born in 356 M41 on the frontier world of Donia in Segmentum Pacificus. He was heir to the planetary governor of Donia. His father was named Pella, coincidentally echoing the name of Alexander the Great's ancient birthplace on Terra. From the start, greatness was expected of him. He came of age at a time when the Imperium was still recovering from the age of apostasy, a period of civil strife that had left many worlds isolated or in rebellion. The young Macarius cut his teeth, putting down such insurgencies and border wars. By his early 20s, he had risen to the rank of general in the Astra Militarum, known for decisive action and bold strategy that set him apart from his peers. One early campaign cemented Macarius's reputation, the Roxane Rebellion. During that conflict, Macarius's forces not only crushed a dangerous uprising, but also rescued the life of Lord Commander Solar Philips, the overall imperial commander of Segmentum Solar, who had been ambushed. Philips, grateful and impressed, recognized Macarius's brilliance. He took the young general under his wing and eventually named Macarius as his chosen successor. This was an unprecedented honor for someone so junior, but Macarius's trajectory was unmistakable. In 386 M41, Lord Solar Philips was killed in battle, felled during the Lamort landings. In accordance with his wishes, Macarius inherited Philips's title and command. At the astonishing age of 30, Macarius became the new Lord Commander Solar, supreme commander of all imperial military forces in Segmentum Solar, and one of the High Lords of Terra. He was the youngest ever to hold the post. Many were shocked at this meteoric rise, but those who had seen Macarius in action did not doubt his capability. He possessed a charisma that inspired devotion and a tactical genius that had already saved worlds. Macarius traveled to Terra only once, for his formal investiture as Lord Commander Solar. Surrounded by the awe of the imperial palace, he reportedly said little, but the ceremony only steeled his resolve to fulfill what he saw as his destiny. Returning to Segmentum Solar, he immediately put his new authority to use. Taking command of several veteran regiments from his homeworld, the Donian regiments, Macarius launched a string of swift victories to secure the Segmentum's fringes. Between 387 M41 and 391 M41, his forces reconquered the worlds of Land's End, Morbellum, and Jalfrezices the Thread, planets that had fallen out of imperial contact. Macarius swept these worlds back into the Emperor's fold with ruthless efficiency. Each success further burnished his legend, but conquering a few stray worlds was not enough for Macarius. He hungered for something far grander. It was then that Macarius unveiled an audacious plan. He petitioned the High Lords of Terra to sanction a massive new crusade of expansion, one to rival the Emperor's own Great Crusade of Antiquity. He proposed to push the Imperium's borders outward and reclaim hundreds of lost worlds. To many, this sounded like madness or hubris. Such an undertaking had not been attempted in millennia. But Macarius's confidence was contagious. His recent successes and fiery determination convinced the High Lords, and perhaps they figured if anyone could pull it off, it was this young prodigy. Permission was granted. Macarius was effectively appointed war master of a grand imperial crusade. Vast resources were placed at his disposal. Entire army groups of the Imperial Guard, fleets of the Imperial Navy, Titan battle groups from the Mechanicus, and more. Over the next year, he organized his forces into 7 mighty army groups. Macarius himself would lead the first army group. He appointed 6 trusted generals, men who had proven themselves under his command, to lead the others. These were Generals Sejanus, Tarka, Lysander, Borgan Crassus, Arrian, and Cyrus of Larentine. Each army group numbered millions of soldiers, with armor, artillery, and starship support beyond measure. In early 392 M41, Macarius gathered this vast host on his homeworld of Donia, soon to be rechristened Macaria in his honor. There, on the eve of departure, Macarius addressed his troops and set the tone for the campaign. He spoke of destiny and the emperor's will, famously declaring that humanity would claim the stars that had been lost. His words electrified the armies. Thus began the legendary Macarian crusade. In 392 M41, Macarius's crusade fleet departed Macaria and plunged into the unexplored territories at the far western edge of the galaxy. This was wild space, stretching into the halo zone beyond the Astronomican's guidance, realms where the Imperium's light had never shone or had been extinguished long ago. Many of these worlds had been isolated since the age of apostasy, left to fall into anarchy, heresy, or the clutches of aliens. Macarius was determined to bring them all back into the imperial fold. The Crusade's first major test came against the so-called cult of the Angel of Fire. This hostile regime dominated the Karsk star system and preached a twisted faith centered on a being they called the Angel of Fire. Macarius led an assault to liberate Karsk. During the fierce battles, the true nature of the cult's deity was revealed. It was a greater demon of Tzinch, a chaos entity masquerading as a divine figure. The wounded Macarius found himself face to face with this demonic angel amidst the burning ruins of the cult's stronghold. The daemon offered Macarius power in exchange for his soul, but Macarius rejected the temptations outright. With the aid of his army's accompanying confessors and a well-placed plasma blast, he banished the greater demon back to the warp. The cult's power was broken in one stroke. Karsk was freed, and Macarius had shown that neither sorcery nor terror could make him falter. This dramatic victory set the tone. The crusade would tolerate no evil, human or otherwise, that stood in the way of the Imperium. From there, Macarius pushed onward into Segmentum Pacificus, engaging a vast array of enemies. His forces encountered lost human civilizations, some advanced and independent, others degenerate and ruled by tyrants. They confronted belligerent Xenos empires, marauding Orc warlords, Eldar pirate fleets, heretical chaos warbands, the full menagerie of threats lurking in the darkness. No matter what, Macarius pressed forward relentlessly, adapting to each new foe. On some worlds, diplomacy and show of force convinced isolated human colonies to willingly rejoin the Imperium. On many others, only war could decide the outcome, and Macarius triumphed again and again. It is impossible to recount every battle in detail, but a few stood out even at the time as legendary. In 392 M41, during the first year of the Crusade, Macarius's second army group under General Sejanus fought across the desert world of Persepolis. Persepolis, a hive world lost for 5,000 years, was recontacted and brought back into imperial compliance after heavy fighting in the dunes of its Gedrosia desert. During that campaign, Macarius himself traveling between fronts as needed, discovered the tomb of an ancient imperial explorer known as Indigiona the Vagrant. Within the dusty vault, Macarius found Indigona's ornate, winged golden helmet, a relic of a bygone age. Macarius took this helm as a trophy and wore it for the rest of the crusade, a symbol that even the secrets of the past would bow to the Imperium's new triumphs. In 393 M41, on the world of Saga 4, Macarius's forces clashed with a company of Chaos Space Marines, traitor Astartes, who had been terrorizing the sector. During the battle, a bolter round fired by one of these Chaos Marines struck Macarius square in the chest. Incredibly, the explosive shell lodged in his armor, but failed to detonate. Macarius pulled the dud bolt round from his breastplate and continued fighting, undeterred. The priests at his side proclaimed it a miracle of the Emperor's divine protection. To the Crusade's soldiers, this was further proof that Macarius was blessed. Many began to regard him with outright reverence, as if he were a living conduit of the Emperor's will. In 395 M41, the Crusade fought a bitter campaign on the industrial world of Thoth. There, General Arrian's Sixth Army Group became bogged down against dug-in heretic rebels. Macarius arrived with reinforcements from his First Army Group and executed a brilliant flanking maneuver, breaking the deadlock. The last enemy bastion fell shortly thereafter. Thoth's conquest showed a pattern. Whenever Macarius appeared on a battlefield, the stalemate would break and victory swiftly followed. One of the toughest challenges came from the advanced human realm of Adeptus 5. In 395 to 397 M41, General Borgen Crassus's Fifth Army Group laid siege to this highly developed, fiercely independent planet. Adeptus 5 possessed technology and defenses that rivaled the Imperium's, and they resisted ferociously. The fighting ground on for 2 years, becoming a war of attrition that chewed up Imperial regiments at an alarming rate. Crassus lost up to 90% of his forces trying to take the planet's fortresses. Finally, Macarius intervened personally with an extreme solution. He ordered an ancient comet that was orbiting the system to be diverted from its path and directed to impact Adeptus 5. In an act of calculated devastation, the comet was guided, via painstaking naval maneuvers and gravity tethers, into the planet. The comet's apocalyptic impact obliterated Adeptus 5's primary continent and threw the world into chaos. With their cities shattered and population decimated, the defenders surrendered to the Imperium. Adeptus 5 was conquered not by trenches and laser guns, but by turning a celestial body into a weapon. This grim tactic underscored Macarius's mindset. No price was too high and no measure too drastic if it achieved victory for the Emperor. Late in 397 M41, the Crusade had to contend with a massive orc incursion. An enormous orc, that barreled into the path of Macarius's advancing armies. The orcs, led by a hulking war boss, brought huge numbers and brute strength to bear. Macarius did not shy away from the green tide. He met it head-on. A series of colossal battles ensued, one of the greatest being remembered as the Battle of Calastin. At Calastin, Macarius's forces faced millions upon millions of orcs. In the brutal fighting, Macarius was even wounded by the orc war boss in hand-to-hand combat, a rare moment where his life was in real peril. Yet even this could not halt him. He recovered quickly, some would say miraculously fast, from his injuries and returned to the front. Eventually, the imperial firepower and Macarius's unyielding leadership ground down the orc horde. The war boss was slain, and the shattered into disorganized remnants. Imperial scholars later hyperbolically claimed that 23 billion orcs were exterminated in Macarius's campaign against them. Whether or not the body count was that astronomical, it's clear the orc threat was thoroughly crushed. By now, Macarius's soldiers had started to believe that their commander could not be defeated by any foe. He had overcome aliens, heretics, traitor marines, demons, you name it. Not all episodes of the crusade were shining examples of honor. The pressures of constant warfare and Macarius's drive for results sometimes led to brutality. For instance, on one world, General Arian, the same who fought on Thoth, went too far. Frustrated by local resistance, he ordered such horrendous reprisals, slaughtering civilian populations wholesale, that even his own veteran troops were appalled. Some of Arian's regiments mutinied, refusing to continue by committing atrocities. Arian responded by executing the mutineers to the last man, a massacre that earned that region the ominous name Arian's Wrath. Macarius was furious when he learned of this. He demanded discipline and piety, not wanton butchery of fellow imperial citizens. Arian was reprimanded, and some say quietly removed from command later. Still, the dark deed was done, a grim footnote that the Crusade's glory was not without shadows. Through it all, Macarius kept his vast forces coordinated and focused on the ultimate objective. He made excellent use of the resources at hand. The Crusade was not just the Imperial Guard. It was practically the entire might of the Imperium mobilized. Over 100 different Imperial Guard regiments took part, drawn from famous worlds like Cadia, Katakan, Talon, and more. These included jungle fighters, desert raiders, hive-born shock troops, a diversity that Macarius wielded expertly, assigning each to battles that suited their specialties. The Imperial Navy ensured space superiority, ferrying armies across the void and bombarding entrenched enemies from orbit when necessary. Several Space Marine chapters lent aid as well, providing elite contingents for critical assaults. A company of the Space Wolves under Wolf, Lord Ulrich Grimfang, for example, secured the ice world of Jotungarth for Macarius, and the Star Phantoms chapter undertook the Purge of Viridia, a deadly jungle world during the Crusade. The Adeptus Mechanicus contributed Titan legions and cohorts of cybernetic Skitarii to support key battles. Knight Household, the giant war knights of feudal worlds, marched under Macarius's banner, their nobles honored to fight under the great Lord Solar. He presented those knightly allies with personal battle standards called the Banner of Macarius Triumphant to commemorate their service. In short, Macarius commanded a coalition of imperial power on a scale rarely seen. It had been 10 millennia since the galaxy had witnessed such a concerted imperial offensive. The results were staggering. The Imperium's frontier was pushed outward at a speed and scale that defied bureaucratic comprehension. In the first year of the Crusade, roughly 100 worlds were brought into imperial control. By the end of the second year, the tally had grown by several hundred more. After 3 years of constant campaigning, nearly 700 planets had fallen to Macarius's armies. Each success was followed by the work of consolidation. Ecclesiarchy, missionaries would establish churches and preach the imperial creed to the newly conquered populations, while inquisitors and commissars rooted out lingering heresies or xenos influences. Imperial governance was imposed, sometimes gently, sometimes by force. Many worlds gratefully accepted reunion with the greater human empire. Others required harsh example setting. There were instances of entire cities being razed to cow a planet into submission. Macarius was pragmatic. He preferred a world intact and compliant, but if the only way to ensure no future rebellion was to make a bloody example, he would. He famously said, "The meaning of victory is not merely to defeat your enemy, but to destroy him utterly, to leave no remnant that could rise again." In practice, that meant some worlds were almost depopulated if they resisted too hard. But most often, once the initial shock and awe passed, Macarius's forces restored order, and life under the Aquila resumed. By the year 399 M41, the Macarian crusade had achieved unprecedented success. Macarius's grand army stood at the very edge of the galaxy, deep into the halo zone near Galactic West, farther than any imperial banners had been carried since the Great Crusade of legend. Nearly 1,000 worlds had been brought back into the Imperium's embrace. The Crusade's forces were effectively undefeated by any external enemy. It should have been the moment of Macarius's ultimate triumph. And yet, it was here, on the brink of ultimate victory, that the crusade finally ground to a halt, not because of any foe, but because of the limits of human endurance. As Macarius gazed beyond the mapped stars, he was eager to push onward into the uncharted void. His eyes were set on distant points of light that no imperial cartographer had ever marked. However, his generals and soldiers, the men and women who had followed him through 7 years of constant war, reached their breaking point. They were exhausted. They had been fighting continuously, light years from home and suffering immense hardships on world after world. Now they stood at the threshold of the unknown, facing regions where even the Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, could not guide them. Rumors spread through the ranks that beyond this point lay doom. Navigators might not steer safely, astropaths would be out of communication range, and supply lines would be impossible. Superstitious fear took hold as well. Scout detachments sent into the halo stars had disappeared or returned insane, babbling about ghost planets and stars that whispered curses. The rank-and-file guardsmen, hardened though they were, felt a primordial terror of venturing into that cosmic darkness. A delegation of Macarius's top generals, those he trusted most, finally worked up the courage to confront him. They respectfully but firmly requested that the crusade stop here and return to imperial space to consolidate its gains. They pleaded that the troops were at the end of their strength, that pushing further would invite disaster. They pointed out the practical difficulties of waging war beyond the Astronomicon's light, and how the Imperium might lose contact with them entirely. It was, in truth, a mutiny of reason. The generals were refusing to proceed. Macarius's reaction was as explosive as it was sorrowful. He was absolutely furious. He viewed this as a betrayal by the people he had led to glory. According to accounts, he accused his generals and troops of cowardice and lack of faith. After all their victories over tangible enemies, they now flinched at shadows and distance. Macarius's dream was to march forever onward. Being told no at the very edge of the galaxy was like a dagger to his heart. Some say Macarius, in his rage, even wept, not in weakness but in sheer frustration that his will alone was no longer enough. He railed at his assembled commanders, but they stood firm, albeit with bowed heads. For the first time, Macarius could not simply command reality to bend to his ambition. Seething and heartbroken, Macarius had no choice but to yield to the inevitable. He retreated to his private chambers aboard his flagship and closed himself off. For days he spoke to no one. Rumor has it he spent that time in a bitter haze of alcohol, drowning his disappointment in Amasek. The great conqueror, who had been like a force of nature, suddenly fell silent, locked away with his anguish. His officers and soldiers waited anxiously. Some feared he might even take his own life or do something rash. Others whispered prayers that the emperor would guide their lord through this dark night of the soul. He was heard to bitterly lament that he did not have braver heroes at his command, that the heroes of old would not have balked as his men did. At last, Macarius emerged. Gone was the fire in his eyes. Those who saw him said he looked as if he had aged 10 years in a week. In a calm, measured tone, he announced that the crusade was over. The armies would turn back toward home. The war was won. It was time to return and secure what they had achieved. Upon hearing this, the exhausted soldiers cheered for Macarius. They still loved and admired him deeply, and if their beloved Lord Solar said it was time to go back, they celebrated him as the hero who would lead them home safely. The generals breathed sighs of relief. The worst confrontation of their careers was past. But Macarius's personal triumph had turned to ashes. He would comply with his men's wishes, but inside his spirit was broken. He had finally been defeated, not by any Xenos warlord or traitor, but by the limits of human resolve. The Grand Fleet, now a star-spanning caravan of victorious legions and captured worlds' tithes, began the journey back to Imperial space. Macarius planned to travel to Terra and present the High Lords with the news of nearly 1,000 worlds reclaimed for the Imperium. However, fate intervened one last time. In mid-transit in the year 400 M41, Lord Commander Solar Macarius died. The official Imperial announcement was that he succumbed to a virulent jungle fever, an illness he had contracted on the swamp world of Jucha during the crusade. The fever had lain dormant and then struck suddenly during the return voyage, taking even Macarius's formidable constitution by surprise. Despite the best efforts of the fleet's medici, the great hero passed away, reportedly whispering the Emperor's name with his final breath. That is the story as told to the masses, tragic but mundane. The truth of Macarius's death, however, is far more sinister and shrouded in secrecy. Over time, fragments of information and whispered testimonies have suggested that Macarius's end was not a simple disease at all, but a deliberate act of conspiracy. Recall the battle on Loki against the traitor General Richter, who had turned to Nurgle's worship. Macarius had indeed been infected by heinous plagues during that campaign. By the time the crusade was ending, those diseases were ravaging him from within. Unofficial accounts indicate that Macarius was suffering terribly on the voyage home, his health in rapid decline, his body failing under the creeping corruption of Nurgle's toxins. The high powers of the Imperium, perhaps an inquisitorial cabal or certain high lords, were faced with a dilemma. Macarius was the glorious hero of the age. To have him arrive on Terra as a dying, plague-ridden man would tarnish the almost saintly image that had been built around him. They needed Macarius to remain a symbol of hope and triumph, unsullied by weakness or chaos. And so the grim decision was made. According to hidden testimonies that later surfaced, an agent of the Officio Assassinorum was embedded among Macarius's honor guard. This assassin, identity unknown, awaited the opportune moment. When Macarius's condition worsened to the brink, and he lay bedridden and feverish, the assassin struck. With a swift, possibly merciful poison or blade, the agent killed Lord Macarius. It was a clean death, sparing him the indignity of wasting away and potentially succumbing fully to Nurgle's rot. To ensure the subterfuge remained secret, it's said this same assassin then eliminated Inquisitor Hieronymus Drake, Macarius's chief liaison with the Inquisition, who was either involved in the plot or aware of it. Both deaths were then attributed to the mysterious fever from Jucha. In this way, the narrative was controlled. Macarius died a tragic but natural death. He became a martyred hero at the height of his glory, not a weakened victim of chaos. The imperial propaganda machine could thus canonize him without complication. Only a handful of people ever knew the truth, and they ensured it was buried. Of course, in the Grand Imperium, secrets rarely remain completely sealed. Over the years, rumors of this dark chapter leaked out, pieced together by inquisitive minds and hinted at in restricted archives. It adds a sobering footnote. The Imperium that Macarius served may have repaid him with a dose of treachery, albeit in the name of preserving his legend. Macarius had always been ready to die for the Imperium. In the end, the Imperium made that choice for him. Regardless, the official line held firm. The great Macarius had died of illness during the voyage home. When the fleet returned to Macarius's homeworld, they carried not only the spoils of 1,000 worlds, but the body of the man who had won them. The galaxy mourned. On Macaria, formerly Donia, a magnificent state funeral was held. Dignitaries from across the Imperium converged to pay homage. The High Lords of Terra, ranking ecclesiarchs of the Church, tech priests of the Mechanicus, and decorated Imperial Guard commanders all assembled under the somber sky of Macaria to honor the fallen Lord Solar. 1,000,000 troops, men and women who had fought in the crusade, formed an honor guard that stretched 4 kilometers. Macarius's corpse, preserved and armored in full regalia, lay in a grand sarcophagus borne by a gilded tank chassis. In a traditional gesture of respect, 100 Imperial Guard generals who had served in the crusade stepped forward, one by one, to lay their swords on Macarius's coffin. It signified that they were relinquishing their command in deference to the greatest commander among them. Many in the crowd openly wept, an unusual display in the grim Imperium, as hymns echoed. The man who had seemed invincible was gone, and the void he left was immense. Not long after, the ecclesiarchy officially canonized Macarius as a saint of the imperial cult. Perhaps this was expected. The common soldiers had already revered him as a living saint, and even Macarius's more secular-minded peers acknowledged that his feats bordered on the miraculous. The ecclesiarchy is always eager to embrace a popular hero, especially one who can serve as a symbol of faith. Saint Macarius was proclaimed patron of war leaders and conquerors. His homeworld was renamed Macaria permanently and declared a shrine world. Over his tomb, the Imperium raised a colossal cathedral, its spires reaching into the sky, filled with sculptures and frescoes depicting scenes from the Macarian crusade. Pilgrims began arriving from across the Imperium to pray at Macarius's resting place. To this day, thousands of the faithful arrive on Macaria annually, kneeling before the marble statue of the Lord Solar, asking his intercession in battle or giving thanks for victories won. Some particularly devout followers even attempt the pilgrimage of Macarius, a grand tour following the route of the Macarian crusade through space, visiting many of the worlds he conquered. It's a perilous endeavor, since many of those fringe worlds remain dangerous, and very few who set out on the pilgrimage ever complete it. Most die along the way, claimed by the same perils of war and void that Macarius once navigated. Still, the tradition persists as a test of faith and endurance, dedicated to the saint who nearly reached the edge of the galaxy. However, even as Macarius was being immortalized, the empire he forged began to unravel. With Macarius no longer at the helm, the unity he had imposed on disparate worlds and ambitious commanders disintegrated. The new territories fell into turmoil in what became known as the Macarian heresy. For 70 years after Macarius's death, the regions he had conquered were consumed by civil war and rebellion. Many of Macarius's subordinate generals, who had once been brothers in arms, turned into rivals and warlords. Some crowned themselves kings of the worlds they garrisoned, refusing to cede power to any other authority. Others feuded over boundaries and spoils. The freshly liberated planets, seeing the imperial forces fight among themselves, took the opportunity to rise up again, or assert independence. Chaos, in short, reigned in the aftermath of the crusade. It was a bitter coda. Nearly 1,000 worlds had been won for the Imperium, only for a large portion of them to slip away or fall into anarchy when their conqueror was no longer present. The High Lords of Terra eventually responded by unleashing fresh forces to quell this anarchy. Several Space Marine chapters and Adeptus Astartes strike forces were dispatched in what amounted to a second wave of conquests, but this time aimed at Imperial rebels and recalcitrant generals. Over decades, these Space Marines and Loyalist Guard units put down the rogue commanders, enforced Imperial rule, and punished traitors. By the time the Macarian heresy was declared ended, around 470 M41, stability had been largely restored. Even so, a number of the worlds Macarius had added were lost again, some depopulated by the fighting, others intentionally abandoned by the Imperium as too troublesome. In the end, perhaps half or more of his conquests remained firmly imperial. The rest became footnotes or required continual suppression. It was as if Alexander the Great's empire fragmented among his generals once he was gone, which, fittingly, was exactly what happened to Macarius's empire. Despite this troubled legacy on the ground, Macarius's legend emerged unscathed. Indeed, it grew even grander with time. The Imperium chose to remember the glory, not the shortcomings. In official histories and popular lore, Macarius is celebrated as the greatest Imperial Guard commander who ever lived. He is often referred to as the Second Alexander, or the Savior of 1,000 worlds. No one has ever replicated his feat of conquering so much, so fast. Over the centuries, whenever the Imperium has launched new campaigns or faced desperate wars, the figure of Macarius is invoked as an ideal of leadership and daring. In the military academies, cadets study Macarius's campaigns to glean lessons in strategy, though wise instructors also quietly note the logistical overstretch and cautionary elements of the Crusade's end. The most prestigious medal an Imperial officer can earn for tactical brilliance is the Macarian Cross, named in Macarius's honor. To receive the Macarian Cross is to be compared to the great Lord Solar himself, a rare accolade that only the most ingenious and bold commanders attain. Macarius's name also lives on in war materiel. The Adeptus Mechanicus developed a pattern of heavy tank known as the Macarius Heavy Tank, honoring the Lord Solar's penchant for overwhelming firepower. This tank is a super-heavy battle tank, smaller than a Baneblade but still a giant on the battlefield, designed to bring the kind of decisive might that Macarius would appreciate. In void warfare, several Imperial Navy vessels over the years have been christened with Macarius's name or variants of it, such as the battleship Lord Solar Macarius and the cruiser Macaria Victrix, hoping to inspire fear in the enemy and courage in the crew through association with his legend. One of the strangest and most secret chapters of Macarius's posthumous influence was the Imperium's attempt to clone him. In an experimental program known as the Afriel strain, the genetic template of Macarius was used to create hundreds of clones, with the idea of possibly raising a successor that could emulate the original's genius. Unfortunately, or perhaps mercifully, the project was a failure. Roughly 500 Macarius clones were grown. Almost all manifested unpredictable defects or met with misfortune. A few survived long enough to serve in minor roles. One female clone, Lorii, served in a penal legion and died in combat, for instance. But none came close to measuring up to the true Macarius. Whatever mix of qualities the real Macarius possessed, leadership, charisma, cunning, faith, it was not something that could simply be copied in a laboratory. The Afriel strain program was quietly abandoned, the implication being that Macarius was one of a kind. What are we to make of Lord Solar Macarius? In the final analysis, he was a man of contrasts. He was utterly loyal to the Emperor and filled with genuine religious devotion. Yet he was also personally ambitious and gloried in conquest for conquest's sake. He brought illumination to countless worlds, yet left many in ruins. He was celebrated as a liberator by some populations and cursed as a destroyer by others. In him, the Imperium's noblest virtues and its harshest cruelties intersected. Perhaps that is why he has become such a mythical figure. He represents the Imperium itself, in all its stern glory and tragic darkness. As one veteran of the crusade dryly remarked, Macarius was no holy immortal. He was a man, a very great man, and in some ways a very wicked one. This frank assessment highlights that, even in legend, Macarius's humanity, with all its virtue and vice, remains evident. Macarius's life invites comparison to the great conquerors of ancient history, those few bits of Terran history that are still remembered in the far future. Indeed, the parallels to Alexander the Great are deliberate and numerous. Like Alexander, Macarius was born in the year 356, albeit 356 M41 in Macarius's case, became a general while young, cut a swathe of victories virtually unmatched in scope, and died suddenly before the age of 45 after his troops refused to march further. And just as Alexander's empire fragmented among his generals, so did Macarius's conquests fall apart after his passing. Yet both figures left an enduring legend that far outlasted their mortal lives. In the Imperium of the 41st, now 42nd millennium, that legend is a beacon. When imperial citizens pray for deliverance from invading armies, they invoke Saint Macarius. When a newly minted guard colonel seeks inspiration on how to achieve the impossible, he looks to Macarius's example. The legacy of Macarius is so towering that even the current Lord Commander Solar, a title rarely granted since, is measured against him. He has become, in essence, a benchmark for the Imperium's heroes. As one veteran of the crusade later said of Macarius, he was no saint. He was a man, a very great man, and in some ways a very wicked one. Even in myth, that complexity lingers. To be sure, not everyone remembers the full truth. The average guardsman knows Macarius as that great saint general who won 1,000 worlds and never lost a battle, and that is enough. Myths have power, and Macarius has ascended into myth. The High Lords and Ecclesiarchy are content to let his legend motivate and console the masses. After all, in a galaxy where horrors abound, the Imperium survives on faith, faith in the God Emperor and in those heroes who carry out his will. Lord Commander Solar Macarius was the last great conqueror of the Imperium. No crusade on such a scale has been attempted since. Perhaps none will, until the end of times. His story is equal parts inspiration and cautionary tale. It reminds us that bold action can reshape the galaxy, but also that even the mightiest hero is mortal. Macarius reached for the stars, and for a brief moment he held them in his grasp. Had fate and his own followers allowed, he would have kept going, ever onward into the endless night. In the end, Macarius achieved immortality, not in body, but in legacy. His name will be spoken as long as humanity endures among the stars. Whenever the Imperium needs to remember what sheer human will and courage can accomplish, the tale of Macarius will be told. He was a man who dared to dream of the Imperium's expansion when others were content to defend and hide. He reignited the spirit of conquest in a time of decay. And though he fell short of his ultimate goal, what he did achieve was extraordinary. Nearly 1,000 worlds owe their allegiance, at least initially, to his actions. As Macarius himself once said on the eve of battle, "The stars are ours." For 7 glorious years, he made that declaration true for the Imperium of man, carving a legend across the galaxy that remains unmatched. Macarius was the brightest star of his age, and though he burned out too soon, the afterglow of his deeds continues to inspire the Imperium even today. Even now, centuries later, imperial commanders and common citizens alike look to the legend of Macarius for inspiration. His saga remains proof that in the grim darkness of the far future, one person's faith and courage can change the course of history, even if only for a while. He will forever be remembered as a symbol of the Imperium's unyielding resolve and the heights that human determination can reach. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are soldiers, and then there are Tempestus Scions. This is a name spoken with a mix of awe, envy, and fear across a million worlds of the Imperium. To some, they're the glory boys, strutting around in their immaculate carapace armor and wielding high-powered weapons. To others, they're saviors, angels in sealed helmets descending from the sky to turn the tide of battle in humanity's darkest hours. However you refer to them, one thing is certain: the Tempestus Scions are the elite special forces of the Imperium, and they have earned every ounce of that deadly reputation. These men and women are not your average Imperial guardsmen, far from it. A Tempestus Scion is a cold, proficient killer, honed to the peak of unaugmented human potential. While ordinary guardsmen rely on lasguns and courage in overwhelming numbers, Scions bring precision, discipline, and an almost superhuman level of training to the battlefield. They fight without question or hesitation until their orders are fulfilled, embodying the imperial ideal of unflinching obedience. In their hands, a standard mission becomes a masterclass in shock and awe. Pinpoint lasfire, reducing enemies to smoldering heaps of corpses, coordinated assaults, striking like a surgeon's scalpel at the heart of the foe. They are the razor's edge of the Astra Militarum's war machine, a core of flexible and nigh incorruptible soldiers that Imperial High Command deploys only for the most dire and demanding assignments. To understand how the Tempestus Scions earned such status, we need to look at who they are and where they come from. Unlike most military units, the Scions are not raised on any single homeworld. There's no planet Tempestus churning out perfect soldiers. Instead, their origins are far more brutal and, in true Imperial fashion, efficient. Tempestus Scions are products of the Schola Progenium, the Imperium's infamous orphan academies. Every Scion was once a child who lost their parents, often high-ranking Imperial officials or decorated military officers, usually in some war or tragic catastrophe. Rather than being left to fend for themselves, these orphans, known as progena, are scooped up by the Schola Progenium, where the real education begins. And by education, of course, we mean a merciless regime of indoctrination and training that forges frightened children into some of the toughest human beings alive. The motto could very well be, break them down, then rebuild them harder and better. The Schola Progenium does exactly that. Life in the Schola Progenium is a far cry from a normal childhood. From a young age, sometimes as young as 6 or 7, progena are subjected to a harsh monastic existence. They are stripped of their past lives entirely. No personal possessions, no family names or cultural quirks from whatever world they were born on. The Schola ensures that by the time they reach adolescence, these kids barely remember what home was. All that matters now is service to the Emperor. They wake before dawn to prayers and litanies. They spend their days in weapons drills, tactical classes, and endless physical conditioning. Every hour of every day is carefully engineered to instill absolute loyalty and to excise any hint of weakness. If you've ever thought your school was tough, imagine reciting the same prayer 1,000 times without a mistake under the gaze of a drill abbot who's itching for an excuse to cane you. Imagine being forced to march for days on end on half rations, or being tossed into a pit with a live blade and a snarling beast to see if you have the wits and will to come out alive. That's a progenium upbringing in a nutshell. This education is as much psychological as it is physical. The progena are taught that the Emperor of mankind is their one true father now, and that unquestioning obedience is the highest virtue. Hesitation is heresy. One of the first lessons drilled into them is a grim little axiom. Death is not failure. Fear is not failure. The only failure is to disobey orders. If an instructor tells a cadet to charge a fortified machine gun nest with nothing but a practice sword, the cadet will do it without a second thought, or die trying. To hesitate, to question why, is the only thing truly beyond the pale. This mindset is not negotiable. It's burned into their brains through a mix of constant propaganda, peer pressure, and even more invasive measures. Indeed, many progena undergo something politely termed mindscaping, a series of psychological conditioning sessions, sometimes aided by chems or even psychic hypnosis, to scrub away lingering memories and enforce the schola's doctrines deep into their subconscious. The result is a young adult whose faith in the Imperium and the chain of command is literally hardwired into their soul. Not all progena survive this process. In fact, a great many do not. The training is deliberately cruel because the Imperium only wants the absolute cream of the crop to graduate. The Schola Progenium's overseers, the drill abbots, test their charges constantly and often lethally. There are live-fire exercises in surreal combat simulacra called hallucinariums, where cadets must navigate labyrinthine battlefields filled with psychic illusions designed to confuse and terrify them. There, an aspirant might suddenly face apparitions of their dead loved ones, begging them to stop, or experience their worst fears made manifest, all while live rounds zip past their heads. The challenge is simple. Ignore it all and follow orders. Some fail these trials of compliance in spectacular fashion, perhaps hesitating at a critical moment or succumbing to terror. And those failures are not given gentle second chances. More often than not, they disappear from the program, and likely from the land of the living entirely. The brutality even extends to moral tests. One infamous method used on potential commissars who train alongside stormtrooper cadets in the Schola involves ordering a cadet to execute their closest friend among the other students. Without warning and without explaining, it's a drill. Imagine a teenager who's endured years of hardship with one loyal comrade suddenly being told by a stern abbot, "Cadet, draw your sidearm and shoot your companion in the head. That is an order." The ones that pause or refuse, well, they clearly aren't commissar material, and their friend might end up dead regardless, along with their own future prospects. This gives you an idea of how far the Schola Progenium will go to ensure its graduates are completely severed from normal human sentiment. Compassion, doubt, hesitation. These are weaknesses to be excised. By the time the trials of compliance are over, only the utterly dedicated remain. Those who endure and excel face one final hurdle known as Selection Day. On this day, the surviving cadets are evaluated and assigned to their ultimate roles in the Imperium's service. It's here that destinies diverge, the very best of the best, those with unshakable minds, leadership spark, and that special zeal, might be plucked up to become commissars, the feared political officers of the Imperial Guard. A rare few, particularly zealous female progena with unyielding faith, might be earmarked for the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, to serve as power-armored warrior nuns. Occasionally, an individual with a truly unique skill set might even be quietly recruited by the Inquisition as an acolyte. The Inquisitors are always on the lookout for exceptional talent to shape into their agents. But for the vast majority of the successful progena, the path leads to the Ordo Tempestus, the organization that commands the stormtroopers. These inductees are funneled into the Schola Tempestus, essentially an advanced training academy within the progenium system dedicated to producing Tempestus Scions. One could be forgiven for thinking that after the nightmare of the progenium upbringing, the worst is over. But the newly assigned stormtrooper cadets quickly learn that the real pain is only beginning. The Militarum Tempestus, also called the Ordo Tempestus, when including its admin, administrative, and commissar components, runs its own training camps, and if anything, they make the earlier years look like a leisurely stroll through a pleasure garden. The training is ramped up to even more intense levels. Live fire drills where failure means death, zero tolerance for the slightest disobedience, and a curriculum that covers everything from advanced small unit tactics and demolitions to high-altitude grav chute insertion and operating behind enemy lines without support. The instructors are veterans, scions, and commissars themselves, and their approach to teaching is extremely straightforward. You do exactly as ordered with perfection, or you die trying. Those lucky enough to survive 3 years of this hellish schooling graduate as Tempestus Scions, ready to fight and die for the Imperium. Upon graduation, the fresh Scions are immediately assigned to a regiment of the Militarum Tempestus. Now, unlike the Imperial Guard's planetary regiments, which are typically raised from a single world, like Cadia's shock troops or Katakan's jungle fighters, a Tempestus Scion regiment is a cosmopolitan mix. It has to be. Its recruits come from Schola Progenium facilities across the galaxy. One regiment might include soldiers originally born on dozens of different worlds, though none of that matters anymore. By this point, each Scion's past has been all but erased and replaced with the homogenized culture of loyalty, discipline, and little else. What does distinguish these regiments are their code names. Since they aren't named after a homeworld, they are often designated by a numeric and pseudo-Latin or Greek title. Names like the 55th Capic Eagles, the 133rd Lambdan Lions, or the 9th Iotan Gorgons. To the outsider, these names might sound arcane, but to those in the Ordo Tempestus, they carry proud histories and battle honors. A full Tempestus regiment is theoretically a large formation, often larger than a typical Guard regiment. It's said one Scion squad can have up to 10,000 troopers on its rolls. However, you'd rarely, if ever, see all of them deployed in one place as a single army. Remember, these are special forces. They're used sparingly as sharpened tools for precise jobs. In practice, the Militarum Tempestus breaks its regiments down into smaller detachments that are dispatched wherever they're needed most. You might have a company of a few hundred Scions assigned to support a planetary invasion here, 2 squads operating behind enemy lines there, and perhaps a handful kept in reserve for sudden emergencies elsewhere. They could be operating independently or attached to larger Imperial Guard forces as an elite auxiliary. This dispersal sometimes means a Scion squad will fight alongside regular Guard units who've never seen stormtroopers up close before, and that's where the nicknames start flying. To a dirt-stained infantryman who's spent months slogging through trenches, these Scions must look like something out of a propaganda pict. Immaculate uniforms, high-tech rebreather helms with those eerie red goggles, and weapons that actually seem to kill enemies in one shot. Not to mention the Scion's attitude: cool, composed, utterly professional, and maybe a tad arrogant. Or so it seems to the average guardsman. It's no wonder the grunts came up with mocking monikers. Glory Boys is one such name, implying these elite troopers are just fame-seekers or teachers' pets showing off. Another is Big Toy Soldiers, a jab at their fancy kit, as if they're rich kids playing war with expensive toys, unlike the poor line trooper with his battered flak armor and standard-issue flashlight of a laser gun. The Scions, for their part, couldn't care less about the insults. They know jealousy when they hear it, and they're far too disciplined to get into barracks squabbles over petty name-calling. In fact, a Scion squad's mere performance usually silences any mockery soon enough. Even the most bitter guardsman is happy to have a glory boy squad around when the greenskins are breaching the perimeter or a chaos monstrosity is bearing down, because that's when the Scions get to work and remind everyone why they're so valued. So what exactly is it that Tempestus Scions do that sets them apart? In one word, the impossible. They specialize in missions that would be outright suicidal or flat-out impossible for normal human troops. We're talking about special operations par excellence, deep strike assaults into the enemy's heart, high-stakes reconnaissance far beyond friendly lines, infiltration and sabotage missions where a single misstep could mean disaster. Scions excel at airborne and orbital insertions. They'll drop from a Valkyrie aircraft or even from low orbit using grav chutes, land in the middle of an enemy stronghold, guns blazing, and accomplish objectives with a speed and brutality that leaves foes reeling. They might blow up a critical bridge, disable a planetary defense shield generator, assassinate a heretical leader stirring up a rebellion, or snatch a Xenos artifact from right under the alien overlord's noses. These are the sort of tasks you give to the Scions when you absolutely need it done. No excuses, no matter the cost. The Tempestus Scions fight as small, cohesive units, usually squads of around 10 troopers, led by a sergeant equivalent called a Tempestor. Every member of the squad is a veteran by any normal standard. Even the fresh recruits have survived trials that would kill veteran guardsmen. A Scion squad moves with discipline that would make a parade ground commissar weep tears of joy. Each soldier knows his role intimately. They communicate in clipped battle cant through their helmet voxes, coordinate fields of fire with machine-like precision, and adapt to changing battle conditions without losing focus on the mission. Their discipline is such that they can lay down a withering hail of las fire into an onrushing enemy horde, and not a single shot will be wasted on non-optimal targets. It's been said that 10 Scions with hot-shot lasguns can accomplish what 100 regular soldiers cannot. Because while the guard infantryman is spraying and praying, the Scions are surgically picking off high-value targets and coordinating force-multiplying strikes. Let's talk equipment, because the tools of the trade certainly help. The standard gear of a Tempestus Scion is a cut above what most human soldiers get in the Imperium. They wear carapace armor, rigid plates of armoplast and ceramite that cover the vital areas, colored in the stormtroopers' distinctive black, blue, or dark gray, often accented with red or other identification markings depending on their regiment's livery. This armor is much tougher than the typical flak vest a guardsman wears. It can actually stop rounds that would shred lesser protection, and it gives Scions a fighting chance against shrapnel, small arms, even glancing hits from a bolt shell. The helmet, iconic with its rebreather mask and glowing visor lenses, isn't just for show either. It filters toxins and provides an internal oxygen supply for hostile environments, allowing Scions to fight in vacuum or biochemical zones. It also contains an integrated targeter and communications suite. In other words, a Scion's helmet is feeding them tactical data, linking them to each other, and helping them line up kill shots in the chaos of battle. That distinctive sight of a half-dozen Scions advancing with visors gleaming and hellguns leveled, that's enough to send a jolt of both relief, if you're Imperial, and terror, if you're not, through any witness. Ah yes, the guns. Tempestus Scions, Immerse famously carry what's colloquially known as hellguns, or more formally hot-shot lasguns. These are not your grandfather's last rifle. A hot-shot lasgun uses an overcharged power pack, usually a backpack-mounted power supply feeding the rifle via cable, to deliver last bursts far more potent than the garden variety flashlights used by the rank and file. A shot from a hotshot can punch through armored targets that would shrug off normal lasfire. There are tales of Scions cutting down traitor space marines with disciplined volleys, their hotshot blasts boring through power armor at close range. That's no small feat for mere humans with laser guns, and it's a testament to both their weapon quality and their marksmanship. The weapons often have scope targeters interfaced with the helmets for accuracy, and in skilled hands, they can lay down very precise pain. Scion squads also have access to a range of special weapons to tailor their firepower to the mission. Need to burn out a nest of heretics in a building? They'll bring flamers. Expecting heavily armored chaos terminators or a tyrannid monstrosity? Equip a melta gun or two, or maybe a plasma gun to really ruin that target's day. For extra ranged punch, some Scions carry hotshot volley guns, essentially a rapid-fire version of the hotshot layes, a squad support weapon that spews high-energy death at a fearsome rate, perfect for suppressing an enemy or mowing down a charge of mutant berserkers. Every Scion also carries an assortment of grenades, fragmentation for anti-personnel, crack grenades for blowing holes in vehicles or fortifications. And if the mission calls for it, they won't hesitate to slap a melta-bomb on a tank's underbelly or rig an entire ammo dump to explode. In short, they go in armed to the teeth with the best man-portable hardware the Departamento Munitorum can provide, far beyond the average guardsman's kit. It's another reason for that big toy soldier nickname. The grunts see all those fancy guns and gadgets and roll their eyes, until those gadgets save their bacon, of course. Mobility is another key factor. Scions rarely just walk into battle, unless they're stationed on site to begin with. More often, they drop in from the sky. The Aeronautica Imperialis operates Valkyrie assault carriers to ferry Scion squads rapidly across a battlefield, or from orbit to ground. There's a very common sight in many war zones, a flight of Valkyries screaming in low amidst flak bursts and laser fire, back ramps open and black-armored Scions rappelling down or grav-shooting out into the combat zone. Some Scions are trained to deploy exclusively by grav-shoot, earning them a special designation, the Tempestus Aquilons. These Aquilons jump from high altitudes, even stratospheric drops, using advanced grav-shoot packs to slow their descent and land right where they need to be, often behind enemy lines. While all Scions are capable of aerial deployment, the Aquilons take it to an art form. They literally practice nothing else. It takes a certain breed of lunatic bravery, and perhaps a dash of creativity, to specialize in that role, since grav-shooting into a hot LZ with anti-aircraft guns raging is one of the shortest life expectancy gigs around. But the Aquilons' squads attract the few Scions who show a spark of individuality and self-sufficiency beyond the norm qualities the Imperium usually frowns upon, but in this case finds useful for deep infiltration teams that often end up cut off far from support. When not dropping out of the sky, Scions might be rushing into battle in their own dedicated transport vehicles. The Taurox Prime is a common ride, a tough, fast-armored car/troop carrier, bristling with guns, designed specifically to keep up with Scions' aggressive tactics. A Taurox Prime can barrel over rough terrain, delivering a squad safely into the thick of a firefight, its turret and hull weapons providing supporting fire. In urban or close-quarter fights, Scions might also utilize Chimera IFVs or whatever local transport is available. They're pragmatic in that sense. If it has wheels or tracks and can move, and they need to go somewhere, they'll make use of it. But unlike standard guard mechanized infantry, Scions don't typically sit in their transports slugging it out. Vehicles are there to get them where they need to be. Then the Scions disembark and get to work with shock and awe on foot. The organization of the Militarum Tempestus is worth noting because it highlights both how independent and how integrated these troops can be. The Ordo Tempestus, which the Scions belong to, is actually a subdivision of the Administratum, specifically under the Departamento Munitorum's broad umbrella. It also includes the Commissariat. Yes, those terrifying political officers in greatcoats who execute cowards, because commissars and stormtroopers are brothers of a sort, both coming from the Progenium training system. This means Tempestus Scions technically answer up a different chain of command than regular guard regiments. They have their own generals and officers in the Ordo Tempestus structure, and they take orders directly relevant to special operations at the strategic level. In many cases, when a Scion detachment is attached to support an Astra Militarum regiment, the Scions still operate under their own leaders and tactical directives. They're simply cooperating with the larger force. For example, if the Lord Commander Militant of a war zone says, "I need that shield generator on the enemy's capital city destroyed before our main assault," the request goes to the Ordo Tempestus, who assign a Tempestor Prime and some Scion squads to the task. That Tempestor Prime will coordinate with the overall battle plan, but basically has autonomy to carry out the mission as they see fit. Tempestor Primes are the equivalent of captains or majors. Each leads a company or perhaps a whole deployment of Scions. They are invariably seasoned badasses, promoted purely on merit and success rate. A Tempestor Prime has survived countless missions themselves, so they know exactly how a Scion team operates, and they lead from the front when necessary. One can picture a grizzled Tempestor Prime, maybe missing an eye or sporting a bionic arm, calmly directing his troops with short Vox commands as they rappel down into an enemy command bunker. He's seen it all, and nothing phases him, a necessary trait, because Scions often witness horrors that would send average soldiers running screaming. The hierarchy goes roughly. At the top of a deployment, a Tempestor Prime. Below him, Tempestors, squad leaders, and then the Scions, sometimes informally just called troopers. There isn't a complex rank structure with lieutenants and such like in the Guard, partly because Scions often operate in small units where a rigid multi-tiered command is unnecessary, and partly because those who make it that far are expected to take initiative when cut off. Flexibility and quick decision-making are drilled into them. Interestingly, that stands in contrast to normal imperial doctrine for mass troops, which stresses rigid following of orders above all. Scions follow orders too, of course, but their orders might be broader, achieve X objective, where they must adapt and figure out the how on the fly. A Tempestus command squad often accompanies a Tempestor Prime. This is a hand-picked team of the finest Scions in his outfit, carrying a regimental banner, a Vox caster for communication, maybe a medic to keep the Prime and key operatives on their feet. If the Scions are the scalpel, the command squad is like the razor-sharp tip of that scalpel, ensuring the leadership node is protected and effective. Now, given their upbringing and indoctrination, you might wonder, do Tempestus Scions ever falter? Do they ever step out of line? The answer is rarely, but they are still human. Occasionally, a stormtrooper might struggle with the psychological weight of what they've seen or done, or perhaps a bit of personality that wasn't fully crushed might assert itself in the form of disobedience or independent thinking at the wrong time. The Ordo Tempestus has a method for dealing with such troublesome individuals, and unsurprisingly, it's not a gentle rehabilitation program. Scions who can't follow orders, who develop a streak of insubordination, or who just exhibit problematic behavior, are gathered up and placed into penal squads, euphemistically called eradicant formations. The concept is simple and grimly efficient. All the black sheep get herded into a single unit, and that unit is sent on the kind of mission that has a slim chance of survival. But if by some miracle it succeeds, great. The job gets done, and maybe the Scions have redeemed themselves. If, far more likely, they perish in the attempt, well, the problem sorts itself out. In the eyes of High Command, it's a win-win scenario. Survive and prove you are worth the trouble, or die expunging your sins in service to the Emperor. Stories abound of eradicant squads being thrown at heavily fortified gun emplacements, or tasked with holding a choke point against an orc horde with no hope of reinforcement. Sometimes they actually manage to pull off the impossible, and the survivors are deemed rehabilitated, or if command is feeling particularly distrustful, sent right back into another insane mission until they eventually don't return. It's telling that in the Ordo Tempestus, if you hear the word eradicant attached to your unit, you've basically been given a death sentence with a side of slim hope for redemption. All these elements, ruthless training, superior weaponry, unbending discipline, and specialized tactics, make the Tempestus Scions extraordinarily effective. But how does this play out in real war zones? Let's walk through a few examples of their deeds and see what these so-called glory boys have accomplished on the battlefields of the 41st millennium. Consider the hive world of Armageddon, seen to some of the most apocalyptic wars in Imperial history. In the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon against the orcs of Gaz-Kul Thraka, millions of Imperial Guardsmen and numerous Space Marine chapters fought and bled to hold the line. Among them were detachments of stormtroopers. During the Second War, Scion teams were reportedly used to spearhead counter-assaults in the hive cities, sudden strikes through maintenance tunnels and under-hive routes to flank orc mobs that had breached the defenses. In one notable engagement, a squad of Scions from the 44th Alphic Centaurs Regiment executed a high-altitude drop at night right into the middle of an orc encampment outside Hive Vulcanus. They moved through the camp like ghosts, planting melta-bombs on stored orc munitions and fuel depots. When dawn broke and the greenskins formed up to attack the hive, the charges detonated. In the chaos and flames that followed, the stunned orcs were easy prey for an Imperial armored counterattack. A company commander in the Steel Legion later commented that without that timely sabotage, the hive's defenses might have been overwhelmed before dawn. The Scions turned what could have been a tragic last stand into a victory, all with a handful of men willing to jump into a sea of enemies with nothing but stealth and audacity as their shield. On the flip side, stormtroopers also played roles in more clandestine, grim chapters of Armageddon's history. During the First War for Armageddon, which was a chaos invasion led by the demon Primarch Angron, a lot of nasty secret stuff went down. The Grey Knights and Space Wolves were involved in defeating the demonic horde, and in the aftermath, the Inquisition infamously ordered that every surviving human soldier who had witnessed those events be executed or sent to mind-wipe labor camps to contain knowledge of chaos and the Grey Knights. It's a dark footnote, but yes, that included even the victorious stormtroopers who had fought bravely against the demon incursions. Imagine, you survive hell on Earth, doing your duty beyond all expectation, and then you're thanked with a summary death sentence to keep a secret. Some Space Wolves Space Marines were so disgusted by this purge that it caused a huge rift between them and the Inquisition, a period called the Months of Shame. But for our purposes, it illustrates a key point about Tempestus Scions. Their loyalty is absolute and often unappreciated. They will follow an order to the bitter end, even if that order is, effectively, to lay down their own lives or submit to an unjust fate. Scions, who were marched off after the First Armageddon War, did so with the same discipline they took into battle. It's sobering and more than a little tragic, but such is the price of being the Emperor's most faithful blades. Sometimes you get sheathed or shattered when politics demand it. Moving on to other theaters, in the Damocles Gulf Crusade, circa 742 M41, where the Imperium first seriously confronted the rapidly expanding Tau Empire, stormtrooper units were heavily involved. The Tau were technologically advanced and highly strategic, which meant the Imperium needed every edge it could get. Tempestus Scions undertook high-risk reconnaissance on Tau-sept worlds, infiltrating through jungles and across alien skies to gather intel on Tau troop movements and to designate targets for orbital strikes. There's an account of Scions engaging in a deep strike on the Tau world of Dalith Prime, under cover of a diversionary frontal assault by guard regiments. A task force of Scions dropped in behind Tau lines to knock out a critical aerial defense grid. They moved under camo cloaks at night, eliminated sentry drones and fire warriors with silenced weapons, and hacked into the defense network's power generators. When the system went down, Imperial Navy Marauder bombers swooped in unopposed and decimated the Tau positions. Without those Scions, that bombing run would have been shredded by Tau air defenses. The crusade ultimately ended in a stalemate. The Imperium paused operations due to larger threats elsewhere. But the Scions proved their worth time and again in those battles, matching wits with the hyper-advanced Tau tactics and giving them a nasty surprise or two. Another famous engagement, the Taros campaign, 998 M41, chronicled in an Imperial Armor volume. Taros was a desert world where the Imperium attempted to take back a planet that had secretly defected to the Tau. The campaign was rough and ultimately did not go the Imperium's way, but not for lack of heroics. In one episode known as Operation Deathblow, a team composed of volunteers from several stormtrooper companies attempted a decapitation strike on the Tau leadership. 3 Valkyries full of Scions flew a daring low-level insertion across the Taros desert, evading Tau sensors, to hit the main Tau command base near a place called Tarokeen. Their goal was to eliminate the ethereal Aun Vray, a sort of Tau spiritual political leader, and the Tau commander Cadre, hoping to throw the Xenos forces into disarray. The mission, to be frank, was a bloodbath. The stormtroopers fought their way into the heart of the base, and it turned into a protracted close-quarters fight against battlesuits and elite Tau warriors. Casualties were extremely high. Some reports say the Ethereal did indeed perish, possibly at the hands of the Scion team, though the Tau claim an accident killed him. Sure, accident, right. Only a very small handful of Scions made it out to the extraction point, badly wounded and with horrifying tales of what they faced. The strike didn't turn the tide as hoped, but it did demonstrate the lengths to which the Imperium will push these troops, and the lengths to which those troops will go willingly. The survivors were folded back into other units, and one assumes probably sent on another suicide mission shortly after, such as the life of a Tempestus Scion. Of course, it's not all desperate behind enemy lines missions. Scions also bolster front-line assaults where needed. If a campaign's overall strategy calls for taking a fortress, for example, you might see Scions being the ones tasked to breach a particularly tough strongpoint as the tip of the spear, paving the way for regular regiments to pour through. During the Third War for Armageddon, stormtrooper detachments, notably including the Cadian Kasarkin, Cadia's own elite stormtroopers, were deployed in the Hive Hellsreach and Hive Acheron battles. They'd drop onto Hive Spire towers that orcs had overrun, reclaiming anti-aircraft guns or lighthouses that could guide in other forces. At Hive Hellsreach, when an orc gargant, a giant walking idol of destruction, essentially an orc-manufactured battle titan, was lumbering toward the city's outer wall, a handful of scions volunteered to do a grav chute insertion onto the war machine. In a scene worthy of an action holo, they landed on the moving Gargant, fought their way inside it amidst roaring, grease-stained orc engineers, and detonated charges at critical points. The entire monstrosity blew apart before it reached the walls, likely saving tens of thousands of lives in the hive. Did those scions escape the explosion? Of course not. They knew it was a one-way trip, but they went anyway because that's the job. Achieve the objective, no matter the cost. And in doing so, they entered a sort of legend, though most common folk on Armageddon only ever heard rumors of what happened, since official records of the deed are buried in after-action reports. The scions themselves don't seek glory or credit. In the end, blowing up the Gargant was just orders fulfilled. Speaking of glory, one might wonder, are there any celebrated heroes among the Tempestus Scions, like how the Guard have their Colonel Iron Hand Strakins, or the Space Marines have Chapter Masters? The nature of the Scions' work means they often don't become public heroes in the same way. A lot of their missions are classified or just not widely broadcast. However, within the Ordo Tempestus, there are indeed names spoken with reverence. Tempestor Prime Salem Whitlock, for example, is known for commanding the 50th Capic Eagles in the Sanctus Reach campaigns, against an orc onslaught called the Red War. Under his leadership, the Capic Eagles executed drop strikes on key orc supply lines, and even rescued an embattled squadron of Imperial Knights by seizing a crucial fuel depot from the Greenskins. There's also Major Zane Mortensen of the so-called Redemption Corps, a stormtrooper regiment so notorious for getting the dirtiest, deadliest assignments that their nickname within the Guard is the Damned Fools. There's an entire novel about them, actually, which recounts how Mortensen's unit went up against everything from a Genestealer cult uprising to a confrontation with the Adepta Sororitas. Long story short, the Inquisition got involved and things went sideways. Mortensen's lot is a great example of how stormtroopers often operate in the shadows of larger events, rarely getting the accolades. He was a hero by any measure. His troopers almost worshipped him. Yet, outside of those who read classified after-action reports or that one Black Library novel, few know his name. And that's fine with him, one imagines. Scions don't do it for medals or parades. Their reward is the successful completion of the mission and perhaps living to deploy again next time. The Tempestus Scions also work hand in hand with some other specialized forces of the Imperium when necessary. For instance, Inquisitors, especially of the Ordo Xenos or Ordo Hereticus, often find use for stormtrooper squads when a situation calls for more firepower than a lone acolyte, but maybe not the overt might of Space Marines. Inquisitorial stormtroopers are basically scions seconded to an inquisitor's retinue. They wear slightly different insignia, often bearing the Inquisition's emblem, and might operate in plainer clothes if subtlety is needed, but by and large they're the same breed. Progena-trained, ruthlessly effective. If an Inquisitor needs to purge a heretical cult from an underhive or board a rogue trader's ship that's suspected of trafficking demonic artifacts, they might send in their cadre of stormtroopers first to secure the area, guns blazing righteously. Those troopers know that there's no backup coming. It's their job to establish a beachhead for the Inquisitor, and if things go wrong, to die to the last man holding off the threat, so their master can either escape or bring in heavier support. There are stories of Inquisitor-led operations where stormtroopers cleared entire space hulks deck by deck, or held off waves of demonic entities during a chaos cult crackdown until Grey Knights arrived. Naturally, almost none of those tales will ever be known to the public, and often the stormtroopers involved are sworn to secrecy or outright mind-wiped if they saw things above their pay grade. That's another part of being the best of the best. Sometimes you see the worst of the worst, and the Inquisition decides you shouldn't be allowed to remember it. But do the Scions complain? No. If ordered to report for a debriefing that suspiciously feels like a euphemism for something unpleasant, they do it. They follow orders. It's what they do. Amidst all these grim duties, one might ask if there's any sense of camaraderie or spirit among the Tempestus Scions. The answer is yes. In their own stern way, there is. A Scion may outwardly appear an automaton of duty, but they are still human underneath the indoctrination, and bonds do form between soldiers who shed blood together. They have their own traditions and honors within their regiments. The Lambdan Lions might pride themselves on having never failed a mission objective in living memory, even if it cost every last man except one to achieve it. The Eotan Dragons might have a ritual of engraving the names of lost comrades inside their armor plates as a silent reminder of sacrifice. And when Scions from different regiments meet, say 2 squads working jointly on a mission, there's often a healthy rivalry and mutual respect. They'll tease each other, perhaps in rather deadpan fashion, about who got to the objective first, or whose hotshot aim was truer. It's not the boisterous bragging of common troopers, but it exists in subtle forms. They also share a sort of implicit smugness. Not that they'd ever voice it to outsiders, that they are simply better at war than any other baseline human around them. Honestly, it's not misplaced arrogance. It's largely true. They know it, their commanders know it, and even the Space Marines have been known to nod in approval at a Scion strike that goes well, though Astartes would rarely voice it quite so plainly. The war for humanity's survival is endless and cruel, and the Tempestus Scions are a reflection of that cruelty turned back on the enemy. They are both weapons and victims of the Imperium's harsh demands, raised without childhoods, trained to obey without hesitation, used as expendable saboteurs and shock troops. The life of a Scion is not an enviable one, yet there's a certain nobility in their purpose. They choose, or were chosen, and embraced the choice, to be the tip of the spear that defends mankind. They take on the missions no one else can, so that billions of ordinary soldiers and citizens might live another day. In a galaxy filled with superhuman space marines, immortal god emperors, and unspeakable alien horrors, it often falls to mere mortal men and women like the Tempestus Scions to bridge the gap between heroic myth and brutal reality. They are only human. No power armor, no genetic enhancements beyond what any fit soldier could have. But they prove, time and again, that a well-placed charge or an accurate volley can change the course of battles as surely as any 7-foot-tall superhuman with a chainsword. They remind friend and foe alike that the pure resolve and training of an ordinary man can still make a mockery of the enemy's plans. With every drop from a gunship into a storm of gunfire, with every door they kick in to take an objective, the Scions quietly uphold the idea that the Imperium's dominion isn't held by just the demigods or the untouchables, but also by those nameless, faceless elites in the shadows, doing what must be done. The Tempestus Scions fight without accolades, and usually without mercy. Their introduction may be dramatic, black-armored troops rappelling from the heavens, but their departure is often silent. Mission accomplished, they vanish to await the next call. They don't occupy territory or raise flags in triumph. Once their part is done, they hand the field back to the regular armies to hold and govern. In many war zones, the rank and file only realize the Scions were even there when they find the aftermath. A bunker of enemy leaders all dead from precise headshots, or a shield generator mysteriously blown to bits right before the big offensive. "Must have been the glory, boys," a sergeant might mutter, shaking his head in begrudging admiration. Ultimately, the Tempestus Scions are a perfect embodiment of the Imperium of man's ethos, uncompromising, unyielding, and willing to sacrifice everything, including their own humanity in a sense, for the cause of victory. They start as orphans with nothing, and they become razor-edged instruments of the Emperor's will. They are feared by the enemies of mankind and often resented by their fellow soldiers, but they are indispensable. In a universe that knows only war, the Imperium simply cannot survive without forces like the Scions to tip the balance in those make-or-break moments. So the next time you hear the whine of a Valkyrie's engines overhead and see dark figures dropping into the battle, or the next time a grizzled guardsman jokes about some big-shot toy soldiers coming to hog the glory, you'll know exactly who they're talking about. And you'll know that, sarcasm aside, those Tempestus Scions have likely saved the day more times than anyone can count, shedding blood in the shadows and high skies so that the Imperium might emerge into victory's light. They are the Imperium's special forces, the stormtroopers, the finest soldiers a broken human orphan can be forged into. Their story is one of unwavering duty and manufactured courage, and it is one of the many brutal, brilliant threads woven into the tapestry of the 41st millennium's endless war. Short but mighty, that's how a Tempestus Scion would prefer things. Their introductions are brief and their farewells often unspoken. Yet, their impact on the battlefield echoes loudly in the enemy's nightmares and the Imperial history books, at least the classified ones. The Tempestus Scions prove that even in a galaxy of giants and monsters, the resolve of an ordinary human, hardened into unbreakable steel, can stand toe-to-toe with the worst of them and come out on top. They may fight with a hint of sardonic humor behind those expressionless helm visors. After all, who else would be crazy enough to do what they do? But fight they do, and they win. They are Tempestus Scions, the special forces of the Imperium, and when they come knocking, Emperor, have mercy on those who stand in their way. In the grim darkness of the far future, even death is no excuse to stop fighting. For the most elite warriors of humanity, the Adeptus, Astartes, the Space Marines, duty can extend beyond the grave. Today, we explore the Dreadnought, arguably the most terrifying space marine of all, a fallen hero encased in a walking sarcophagus of adamantium and ceramite, still meting out the Emperor's vengeance. This is a tale of warriors too stubborn to die, of legends who trade mortal flesh for cold steel, and of the eternal bond between a space marine's courage and the machine that sustains him. Welcome to a story of war unending. A dreadnought is not merely a tank or a suit of armor, though it may resemble both. It is a towering cybernetic combat walker, a fusion of man and machine. Picture a 10-meter-tall giant striding through smoke and rubble, its footfalls shaking the ground. Its arms might mount roaring heavy bolters or crackling energy claws that can rip a battle tank in half. Shells that would obliterate an ordinary soldier ping off its hull. It fights with the skill and ferocity of an Astartes veteran, yet has the durability and firepower of an armored vehicle. To anyone facing it, the Dreadnought is war made incarnate, implacable, remorseless, and all but unstoppable. Yet, inside that metal behemoth is something even more fearsome. The remains of a space marine hero whose body was broken, but whose will refused to surrender. A dreadnought is essentially a life support sarcophagus built into a combat walker. Within its armored torso lies a living, if mutilated, space marine, often a limbless, scarred torso, sustained by humming generators and nutrient fluids. This fallen warrior is permanently interfaced with the machine through neural links, a mind impulse unit, able to move the dreadnought's limbs as if they were his own. The massive mechanical arms become his arms, the purring reactor heart becomes his heart. In essence, the dreadnought's metal body is an extension of the Space Marine's will, driven by a mind that has witnessed a lifetime of battle, and then some. Historically, the concept of the dreadnought stretches back to the Emperor's earliest conquests. Proto-walker suits existed during the Unification Wars on Terra, though those were primitive contraptions by later standards. It was during the Great Crusade that the true dreadnought came into prominence. The legiones Astartes of that era fielded advanced patterns such as the Contemptor and Derideo, sleek, powerful ancestors of the modern dreadnought, to great effect. Entire formations of dreadnoughts known as Talons would thunder across alien battlefields, spearheading assaults and crushing opposition that even ranks of space marines struggled to overcome. Many of the dreadnoughts still in service today are literally the same chassis from those ancient wars, painstakingly maintained and revered. After the Horus heresy, the galaxy-wide civil war that shattered the Imperium 10,000 years ago, much knowledge was lost or restricted, and the sacred art of constructing new dreadnoughts dwindled. The Adeptus Mechanicus guarded the remaining standard template constructs for dreadnoughts zealously. As a result, every chapter in the post-heresy age often has only a handful of these venerable war machines. Each dreadnought is effectively irreplaceable. When one is lost, it's not merely a military loss, but a cultural and spiritual one for the chapter. Over the millennia, there have been attempts to innovate or rediscover dreadnought designs, some successful, like the recent Primaris patterns, and some forgotten. But by and large, the dreadnoughts that stride to war in the 41st millennium carry the legacy and even the physical relics of those built in far earlier times. They are relics as much as warriors, links to an era when gods and primarchs walked the stars. How does one end up entombed in such a walking tomb? It's not a fate any space marine actively seeks out. There is no career path for becoming a dreadnought. The only way to earn this dubious honor is to get yourself nearly killed in a manner so glorious that your chapter refuses to let you actually die. We're talking about the valiant last stand, the single-handed defense of a breached fortress gate, the slaying of a Xenos warlord at the cost of one's own life. Feats that pass into legend. When a space marine suffers mortal wounds, say, blown apart by a plasma blast, bisected by the claws of a tyrannid monstrosity, or crushed under a collapsing building, and yet somehow clings to the last threads of life, his apothecary, battlefield medic, may retrieve what's left of him. If that warrior is deemed exceptionally valorous and too valuable to lose, and if a dreadnought chassis is available, the chapter will enter him within the sarcophagus of a dreadnought. In other words, instead of a funeral, he gets an upgrade. This upgrade, however, is as much a curse as it is an honor. Imagine a waking existence confined to a metal coffin, wired into machines, kept alive by tubes and cybernetics. For the dying space marine, it's a second chance to serve, but at the cost of ever again living as a man. Once interred, he will never again know the sensation of sunlight on his face or wind in his hair. If he had any hair. Many space marines are bald, but that's the least of his worries now. He will never take off that armor. It is his body now. The transformation is irreversible and total. From the moment the dreadnought's hatch is sealed, the space marine inside ceases to be a flesh-and-blood warrior and becomes something between a man, a machine, and a legend. Space marines refer to their dreadnoughts as ancients or old ones. These warriors have truly earned those titles. Some have been fighting on and off for centuries or millennia. Their memories stretch back to times that other marines know only from history books or myth. They remember the chapter's founding heroes, bygone crusades, even the heresy itself if they're old enough. This makes them living repositories of knowledge and tradition. A dreadnought might recall battle tactics from a war fought 5,000 years ago as if it were yesterday, because for him it practically was. Such ancient wisdom makes them invaluable as advisors and mentors to their chapter. But it also means they carry heavy burdens of grief and experience. They have watched countless battle brothers, and perhaps friends if Space Marines dare use the word, grow old, die, or turn to dust while they endure. They've seen the galaxy change around them, and not always for the better. To preserve both their lives and sanity, dreadnoughts spend most of their time in slumber. Extended neural interfacing with a war machine takes a mental toll. Over long periods, an awake dreadnought's human mind can grow weary, confused, even unstable. Thus, when not fighting, the custom is to let these warriors rest. Within each chapter's fortress monastery, there is usually a reverent hall or vault where the dreadnoughts are housed. Picture a grand chamber lined with alcoves or raised daïses, each holding a silent giant shrouded in semi-darkness. These resting dreadnoughts might be posed kneeling, like knights awaiting a call to arms, or secured in stasis caskets. Tech Marines and chapter serfs tend to them as if caring for slumbering kings. Oil is applied to joints, purity seals and parchments bearing prayers are affixed to armor plates, and soft litanies of maintenance are chanted. It's both an engineering task and a religious ritual. Battle brothers occasionally visit the hall to pay respects, as one would visit a mentor's tomb, except these tombs might stir and speak if duty demands. One cannot help but wonder, what does a dreadnought sense or dream during those long years of sleep? Some say that entombed space marines experience a sort of suspended animation, a dreamless void that makes centuries pass in an eye blink. Others suggest their minds wander in nightmares or memories, reliving old battles, conversing with the shades of long-dead comrades, perhaps even communing in some distant way with the Emperor's spirit. There are tales of dreadnoughts awakening and describing vivid dreams of feasting in the halls of their Primarch or fighting phantoms of the past. Whether those are true visions or just the echo of a superhuman mind trying to fill the darkness, only the ancients themselves know, and most aren't inclined to indulge idle questions about their sleep. What is certain is that awakening can be jarring. Imagine opening your eyes and the last time you were conscious was 200 years ago. The world has moved on without you. Occasionally, an ancient will awaken disoriented, believing himself still in a previous era, or demanding to speak with a commander who died long ago. The chapter's caretakers handle these moments with gentle respect, and perhaps a quick briefing on what millennium it is now, before aiming their ancient warrior toward the new enemy at hand. When the chapter has need of one of its dreadnoughts, the awakening is a moment of both reverence and urgency. A tech marine will oversee the reactivation sequence. In the quiet gloom of the dreadnought vault, runes begin to glow, machines hum, and the sarcophagus's occupants are brought back to awareness. Hydraulic locks disengage with a hiss. The dreadnought's optics flare like giant eyes opening. Often the first sound is a booming vox-amplified growl as the ancient greets the waking world, sometimes a recitation of his name and honors, or perhaps a curt demand for a status report. "Who do I need to kill this time?" being a perfectly valid opening line for some of them. Ritualistically, an honor guard of space marines might be present, standing at attention. They treat the dreadnought not merely as a war machine, but as the honored veteran and comrade that it is. It's customary to salute and formally address the awakened one. "Ancient, the chapter calls upon you," or "Brother, we march to war and would be honored by your presence." Only then does the great warrior truly stride forth, the slumber of ages sloughing off and the familiar lust for battle rising to the fore. On the battlefield, a dreadnought is a fulcrum of power, serving as mobile heavy support, assault breaker, and inspirational icon all at once. It can dramatically shape the course of an engagement. Let's paint a picture. A fortified city under siege, hostile forces entrenched in buildings and behind gun emplacements. Space Marine assault squads advance cautiously, firefights echoing down ruined streets. Then, with a bone-shaking crash, a dreadnought drops from a Thunderhawk gunship or emerges from a breached gate. Gunfire that rattled the Marines' power armor now pitter-patters ineffectively against the dreadnought's adamantium hide. The enemy panics as this 8 to 10 meter giant wades forward. A heavy bolter on its arm unleashes a storm of explosive rounds that tear through barricades. A built-in flamethrower gouts cleansing fire into a sniper nest on an upper floor, flushing out screaming foes. Reaching a reinforced door blocking the way, the dreadnought doesn't bother with breaching charges. It simply slams its power fist into the barrier, tearing it off its hinges in one wrenching pull. The ground trembles under its stride as it leads the Space Marines deeper, a literal engine of war at the forefront. For the enemies of the Imperium, facing a dreadnought is a nightmare made real. Even the bravest or most fanatic often quail at the sight. A common soldier might empty his entire magazine at it and accomplish nothing except drawing the ancient's gaze, which tends to be the last thing that soldier sees before a burst of cannon fire or a massive metal foot comes down. There are countless anecdotal reports from guardsmen and adversaries alike. The moment when a dreadnought appeared on the battlefield was the moment the fight turned hopeless. It's not just the physical threat, it's the psychological weight. How do you kill something that is already dead? How do you stop a warrior who is literally entombed in armor and has nothing left to lose? Seeing one of your shots blow a chunk off a dreadnought's plating, only for it to keep advancing relentlessly, can break the will of even hardened fighters. It's the sort of terror that sends lesser men fleeing, though if they're lucky, the dreadnought might not bother chasing stragglers, preferring to crush more significant targets and leave the mop up to younger Marines. For the Space Marines fighting alongside a dreadnought, the effect is the opposite. It is deeply inspiring and occasionally a little intimidating in an awe-struck way. Imagine being a young battle brother who has only heard tales of the chapter's ancient heroes, and now one of them is literally fighting next to you. You might hear the ancient's voice growling tactical advice over the Voxnet. "Squad Beta, move to flank. I will cover." That voice sounds like what it is. A man speaking from inside a vault, amplified through grating speakers, often with a tinge of dry wit or seasoned confidence that no 30-year-old sergeant could match. Fighting beside a dreadnought, Space Marines feel the weight of their chapter's history driving them on. It's as if the chapter's founder or a legendary hero has returned to lead them. In practical terms, Marines often form up around the dreadnought, using it as moving cover, coordinating their attacks with its thunderous strikes. The dreadnought might be directing less experienced brothers, pointing out enemy armor to kill or breaches to exploit. In the chaos of battle, hearing that crackling, authoritative voice say, "Well struck, brother," after you take down an enemy can be the highest praise a young Space Marine ever dreams of. Dreadnoughts themselves come in various patterns and configurations, tailored to different combat roles. The most venerable standard pattern in the 41st millennium is the Castra Ferrum pattern, often just called the MIKV or Mach 4 dreadnought in some tomes. It's the classic boxy-looking dreadnought that most Imperial citizens might picture if they've heard of these legends. Typically, one of its arms ends in a gigantic powered fist, sometimes with built-in storm bolters or a flamer, and the other arm is a mount for a heavy weapon, such as an assault cannon that spews explosive rounds, a multi-melta that can turn a bunker to molten slag, or twin-linked las cannons capable of punching through tank armor at range. On its hull, it might also carry auxiliary weapons, smoke launchers, grenade launchers, or a stubber turret. Some Castroferum variants are tweaked for specific roles. The ironclad dreadnought is an uprated siege model. It carries extra frontal armor plating like a tortoise shell, making it even tougher at close range. Ironclads often wield seismic hammers or chain fists. Imagine a massive jackhammer or chainsaw built into its arm to pulverize fortifications, and shoulder-mounted hurricane bolters or melt-a-gun arrays for extra punch. These are the ones you send in to crack a fortress gate or root out foes in claustrophobic ship-to-ship boarding actions. Another variant is the Hellfire or Fire Support Dreadnought configuration, beloved by chapters like the Ultramarines. A Hellfire pattern forgoes close combat weapons entirely and instead sports long-range guns on both arms. For example, a pair of twin-linked autocannons for mowing down infantry and light vehicles at distance. The Dark Angel's Mortis Dreadnought is a similar concept. The Hellfire Dreadnought stands back a bit more, essentially acting as a walking gun battery that can still relocate as needed, something a regular artillery piece can't do as well. Some chapters maintain unique special patterns. The Blood Angels and their successors, for instance, have the Furioso Dreadnought. The Furioso is all about aggressive offense, usually equipped with two close combat weapons, both arms ending in power claws or fists, sometimes even talons that drip promethium to ignite targets. A Furioso dreadnought just barrels into the foe head-on, ripping and tearing like an 8-meter-tall metal berserker. It epitomizes the close combat fervor of the Blood Angels. They even have a terrifying offshoot of this, the Death Company dreadnought, like Cassor the Damned, whom we'll discuss soon, wherein a dreadnought's occupant is one of those Blood Angels who has succumbed to the Black Rage. Imagine a dreadnought that's already a deadly rampaging engine, but piloted by a half-insane Marine consumed by visions of his Primarch's death. The result is as frightening as it sounds to friend and foe alike. There are also dreadnoughts that carry particular honors or roles. Venerable dreadnoughts are not a separate pattern of machine, but rather a title given to those that house the oldest and most esteemed warriors. Venerable dreadnoughts often have better craftsmanship or relic components, and their machine spirits, the quasi-consciousness of the machine, are said to be more responsive. On the tabletop, if one were to think of game terms, venerable dreads are a tad harder to kill, reflecting how determined and skilled their pilots are at not getting blown up. Or maybe it's just the luck of the truly ancient. They also tend to be covered in more ornamentation, scrolls naming centuries of victories, purity seals, carved reliefs of the chapter's iconography, etc. These are walking shrines as much as weapons. In rare instances, a chapter will even enter one of its psychers or chaplains into a dreadnought. Yes, librarian dreadnoughts exist. The Blood Angels notably use them. Picture a massive armored war machine that not only has a power fist and plasma gun, but can also unleash psychic lightning or mind bolt blasts. It's like a battle tank that can do wizard tricks. Enemies expecting a straightforward heavy unit are in for a rude surprise when that dreadnought starts warping reality around it. Then there are chaplain dreadnoughts, which are exactly what they sound like, a zealous chaplain entombed, who continues to minister to the faithful even as he cracks heads. A chaplain dreadnought often bears the chapter's sacred reliquaries on its hull and has a distinct skull-faced helm built into the sarcophagus casing, reminiscent of the chaplain's traditional skull helm. They intone litanies through external speakers, exhorting nearby Marines to fight without fear. In the middle of a battle, you hear this booming metallic voice chanting the Emperor's praise and promising redemption through victory. It's enough to raise any loyal Marine's spirits, and perhaps send a chill down a heretic's spine. Technology in Warhammer isn't static, despite the Imperium's reputation for stagnation, and dreadnoughts have seen some new developments in recent times. With the introduction of the Primaris Space Marines, a new breed of taller, even more genetically refined Space Marines, the Adeptus Mechanicus also unveiled a new class of dreadnought for them, the Redemptor Dreadnought. The Redemptor is a brutish hulk, larger than the old patterns, almost akin to the ancient Contemptors in stature, but built with more brutalist design. Its core is a hyperdense microreactor, which gives it tremendous power, enough to lug around heavier weaponry like the macroplasma incinerator, a giant plasma cannon that can fire in two modes, a standard shot or an overcharged blast that risks overheating but can vaporize even super heavy infantry in one hit, or an onslaught Gatling cannon. Basically, a rotary cannon that spits high-caliber rounds at an insane rate. One arm typically ends in a Redemptor fist, larger than the old power fists, which can have a built-in secondary gun like a heavy flamer or another Gatling gun. The Redemptor sacrifices a bit of the elegance of the older dreadnoughts for sheer aggressive output. It barrels forward, guns blazing, then smashes what's left at close range. However, this innovation came at a cost, as often is the case with the Mechanicus. The systems of a Redemptor dreadnought are extremely taxing on the pilot. The neural feedback, the raw power coursing through the interface, is overwhelming. The Mechanicus designers, in their cold logic, considered the pilot almost like a replaceable fuse. If he burns out, well, a small price to pay for an engine of war that might win a battle. And burnout they do. Many Primaris Marines interred in Redemptors can only endure a limited number of combat deployments before their biological components fail. There are grim reports of Redemptors standing silent on the battlefield after a hard-won victory, only for the Tech Marines to open the sarcophagus and find the hero inside has been effectively cooked, reduced to a lifeless husk by the stress and neural strain. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, this is an unfortunate but acceptable trade-off. To the Astartes chapters, it's a tragedy, albeit one they accept if it means the chapter survives. It adds another layer of poignancy. These newest dreadnoughts burn the candle at both ends, blazing brightly but briefly, the pilot giving literally all that remains of his life in a final blaze of glory. To truly understand what makes dreadnoughts so compelling and terrifying, it helps to hear some of their stories. Let's delve into a few famous dreadnoughts and their great deeds, tales recounted in chapter legend and imperial record alike. First, there is Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves chapter. If any single dreadnought deserves the title legendary, it's him. Bjorn is, as of the 41st millennium, the oldest living space marine in the galaxy. Living in the loosest sense, since much of him is machinery at this point. He fought in the Horus heresy itself, 10,000 years ago. As a young warrior, Bjorn served as one of Primarch Leman Russ's honor guard. He earned renown during the Great Crusade and heresy, battling traitor marines and demons alike. His moniker, Fell-Handed, originates from one of those early heroic deeds. In combat with a towering demon of Khorne, Bjorn's hand was severed, yet he still picked up his weapon. Legend says he grabbed a lightning claw from a fallen comrade and leapt at the beast, slashing out its throat. The Primarch Leman Russ, impressed by this fearless act, dubbed him the Fell-Handed and elevated him to his personal retinue. Bjorn even stood by Russ during pivotal moments like the burning of Prospero, where the Space Wolves fought the Thousand Sons Legion. After the heresy, when Leman Russ disappeared on his mysterious final voyage, Bjorn became the first Great Wolf, chapter master of the Space Wolves. He led the chapter with distinction for many years. Eventually, as happens even to the mightiest, Bjorn was grievously wounded. Some accounts say it was during a raid on a Chaos stronghold, others during an attack by rebel humans. Near death, he was interred in a dreadnought to save his life, and thus began his second career as the eternal warrior of Fenris. As a dreadnought, Bjorn continued to serve with ferocity. In the centuries afterward, he fought in wars too numerous to list, from repelling a massive orc wag to dueling the traitorous Primarch Magnus the Red, now a demon prince, during the catastrophic burning of Fenris. In that fight, Bjorn managed to badly hurt Magnus. Some say the most damage Magnus had taken since fighting Russ himself, before Magnus shattered Bjorn's weaponry and nearly destroyed his chassis. Even so, Bjorn survived, and his mere presence had rallied the Space Wolves to ultimately drive off the invaders. Because Bjorn is such a precious living relic, the Space Wolves now wake him only rarely. He's said to slumber for decades or centuries at a time in the Fang, their fortress, in a special vault deep beneath the surface. They rouse him in times of greatest need, like when the chapter's very existence is threatened, or occasionally for matters of great ceremonial importance. For instance, at the dawn of each new century, Bjorn is awakened to attend the Great Feast, a celebration where he holds court and recounts tales of the chapter's ancient past. Picture that scene. A grand hall filled with rowdy space wolves, all pounding tables and drinking ale the way only genetically enhanced giants can, and at the head, a venerable dreadnought, scarred, draped in wolf pelts and honor badges, recounting first-hand memories of fighting alongside their Primarch. It's like having a direct conversation with mythology. Outside the Space Wolves, Bjorn is nearly as revered. When he was encountered by agents of the Inquisition after a certain campaign, during the aftermath of the First War for Armageddon, even the proud Inquisitors and Grey Knights present felt compelled to kneel in respect upon realizing they stood before a warrior who had known the Emperor himself. Bjorn, true to his blunt nature, reportedly found this all very tiresome and told everyone to stand up because he had business to settle. That business happened to be him mediating a very tense standoff between the Space Wolves and the Inquisition, and thanks to his wisdom and perhaps the gravitas he carried, he prevented what could have been a disastrous internecine conflict. Having sorted that out, Bjorn likely grumbled something about needing a long rest and asked to be left alone again. From the hallowed halls of Fenris, let's turn to a tragic hero from a once proud legion. Ancient Rilanor of the Emperor's Children was a dreadnought known as the Unyielding, and his tale is one of loyalty against impossible odds. During the Horus heresy, the Emperor's Children Legion betrayed the Imperium under the sway of their Primarch Fulgrim. But not every legionary went along. On Istvan III, the first culling of loyalists among the traitor legions, Rylanor proved true to his oaths. He was an ancient of rites, a ceremonial officer and veteran in the legion, already interred in a contemptor-pattern dreadnought after sustaining grievous wounds fighting Xenos before the heresy. When Fulgrim tried to purge the loyal Emperor's children by virus-bombing Istvan III, Rylanor survived. He fought alongside heroes like Captain Saul Tarvitz in the ruins of that world, doing his best to thwart the traitors' plans. In the end, Istvan III fell to the traitors, and the loyalist remnants were thought dead. But Rylanor endured. For 10,000 years, the lonely dreadnought remained on that poisonous, lifeless planet, hiding beneath the wreckage, sustained by hatred and whatever slim resources he had. He was utterly alone. His only companions the whispers of memory and the all-consuming need for vengeance on his turncoat, Primarch. Fast forward millennia. Fulgrim, now a debased demon prince of Slaanesh, did eventually heed a curious signal from Istvan III. It was Rylanor, broadcasting a lure. When Fulgrim arrived to investigate this ghost from his past, Rylanor made his final stand. He had rigged the entire area with one of the unused virus bombs that had failed to detonate during the original atrocity. As Fulgrim confronted the lone contemptor, Relinor detonated the device. The resulting cataclysm obliterated the already ruined landscape in a green cloud of deadly biocatalytic virus and flame. Fulgrim, being a demon Primarch, was terribly wounded but not killed. As the story goes, he was scarred and his pride wounded more than anything. But Relinor's act denied Fulgrim his prize and exacted a measure of poetic justice for the loyal brothers slain so long ago. Relinor himself was destroyed in the explosion, finally earning the rest that had been denied him for ages. His memory survives as a legend, a byword for unwavering loyalty. In official Imperial records, Relinor was long listed as presumed killed in action, but amongst those who know the truth, he's honored as the Dreadnought who waited centuries for revenge and delivered it. Now, consider the tale of Breath Ashmantle of the Salamanders, a chapter famed for resilience and fiery wrath. Once he was Captain Sokar Breath of the Salamander's 4th Company, a fearsome warrior known for his stubborn determination, even by Salamander standards, and merciless approach to the Emperor's foes. During a campaign cleansing the moons of Imgal from a Genestealer infestation, Bray Arth was mortally wounded. His body was shattered, but his indomitable spirit lingered on. The Salamanders have a special reverence for their war gear and heroes. After much deliberation and reading of omens, they decided to inter Bray Arth in one of their chapter's most ancient relics, a unique ironclad dreadnought chassis called the Iron Dragon. Salamander's legend holds that the Iron Dragon was forged by their Primarch Vulcan himself. It's an irreplaceable artifact, ornately detailed and incredibly powerful, but also temperamental. Only a Marine with a will of iron could master the Iron Dragon's machine spirit without losing himself. Bray Arth was such a man. Upon taking up this new iron form, Bray Arth wasted no time in adding to his saga. During his very first deployment as a dreadnought, amid the smoky depths of an Underhive rebellion, Bray Arth pursued a band of chaos renegades into the subterranean tunnels beneath the city. Days passed with no contact. Most assumed the ancient was lost, perhaps ambushed in the dark by foul sorcery, or simply trapped by a cave-in. But 9 days later, the earth trembled and a massive, soot-stained dreadnought smashed up through the concrete floor of a plaza. It was Bray Arth. He had spent over a week hunting and exterminating every last foe in the underground labyrinth. His green armor was completely blackened by ash and grime, almost unrecognizable. Not a single inch was unmarred. When amazed fellow salamanders greeted him, he supposedly rumbled, "Area secure," as if nothing were out of the ordinary. From that incident, he earned the name Ashmantle, literally mantled in ash. Brayarth continued to serve with distinction. He was notably awakened to fight in the Badab War, where renegade Space Marine chapters had turned against the Imperium. There, Ashmantle tore through traitor strongholds, his ironclad frame impervious to heavy fire, exacting Vulcan's wrath with flame and fist. Such was his reputation that even after victory, Chapter Master Tushan is said to have allowed Brayarth to return to his rest only begrudgingly. The ancient would have eagerly continued smashing the foes of man without pause, but even a dreadnought's might has limits and need for maintenance. To the salamanders, Brayarth Ashmantle remains a revered figure, the embodiment of their forge-tempered resolve, literally walking through fire and darkness to emerge triumphant. Not all dreadnought sagas are purely glorious. Some are bittersweet or downright horrifying. One famous or infamous case is Ancient Cassor, better known as Cassor the Damned, of the Blood Angels. His story exemplifies the unique curse that chapter bears. Long ago, Kasser was brother Captain Keeler, alternatively recorded as Kezellon in some sources, of the Blood Angels' Second Company, a peerless warrior, undefeated in duels, with centuries of service. During a campaign against the Eldar, he was cut in twain by a Xenos blade. Miraculously, his will kept him clinging to life. The Blood Angels interred him in a dreadnought, allowing this champion to fight on. For nearly 300 years, he did just that, earning the nickname the Fury of Baal for the wrath he visited on the chapter's enemies. But the Blood Angels carry the black rage in their gene seed, a creeping insanity that can strike even the mightiest hero, drowning him in hallucinations of Sanguinius's last stand. Tragically, even in the cold, metal form of a dreadnought, Brother Keeler succumbed to this genetic curse. Imagine the horror. One day, the Blood Angels Tech Marines go to wake their ancient champion, and he's gone mad inside that sarcophagus, roaring and thrashing, believing himself on the slopes of the Imperial Palace fighting Horus's armies. They manage to restrain him. One shudders to think how much trouble it was to subdue a rampaging dreadnought. Following tradition, they repainted his armor black with red crosses, marking him as one of the Death Company, those consumed by the Black Rage. He was given a new name, reflecting his damned condition, Kasser. They chained his limbs when he wasn't in battle, literally chaining the dreadnought to a secure hold so he wouldn't launch into a berserker fury at inappropriate times. Kasser the Damned became the chapter's crazed attack dog, unleashed only in the direst battles where his destructive rage could be pointed solely at the enemy. During the Cryptus campaign against a massive Tyrannid invasion, Kasser was set loose alongside other Death Company Marines. In the apocalyptic struggle on the moon of Asphodex, he actually saved the life of Captain Carlin, the Blood Angels' first company commander. As Carlin was about to be slain by a giant Tyrannid creature, known as the spawn of Cryptus, Kasser barreled in, intercepting the blow with his own armored body, and proceeded to tear the Xenos limb from limb. Even that wasn't enough to put him down. Consumed by battle madness, Kasser then charged a monstrous Carnifex, a huge Tyrannid war beast, and engaged it at point-blank range. In the ensuing clash, the Carnifex was destroyed, and so was Kasser's dreadnought body. When the smoke cleared, the Blood Angels found Kasser's chassis shattered, and the ancient warrior within finally dead. After the campaign, Commander Dante read the roll of honored dead. Upon reaching Kasser's name, he paused, recalling the proud Captain Keeler that Kasser once was. Dante decreed that in the annals of the chapter, Kasser would be remembered by his original name and deeds, not just as a deranged monster. In effect, death had finally expunged the curse from their brother, and he was given back his honor. The tale of Kasser the Damned is a solemn reminder that even a dreadnought, normally a figure of stability and wisdom, can fall victim to inner demons. It underscores the fine line between a living icon and a cautionary tale. Virtually every chapter can tell you about some heroic dreadnought in its ranks, or tragic ones. The Ultramarines speak of ancient Gallatin, who fell holding the line against endless Tyrannids on Prandium, or of ancient Helveticus, who guarded Guilliman's stasis tomb for centuries. The Imperial Fists recall ancient Thassaeus, who fought on the walls of the Imperial Palace in the Horus heresy, and still advises their chapter masters. Even lesser-known chapters have their revered ancients. The Iron Hand's ancient Banus led an entire clan company after his interment, turning his personal tragedy, wounds taken during the heresy, into a symbol of the Iron Hand's credo that flesh is weak, but the machine endures. The Howling Griffins have a story of Chaplain Dreadnought Titus, who, during the Badab War, allowed himself to be surrounded and destroyed by traitors to buy time for his brothers. The humbled enemy, impressed by his stand, even laid his broken sarcophagus to rest in a circle of their own fallen's weapons, an honor from enemy to enemy. Such tales are countless. Thus far, we've discussed loyalist dreadnoughts, those serving the Emperor. But there are, of course, those who serve chaos. The traitor legions and renegade chapters also make use of dreadnoughts, though in their hands this gift becomes a twisted curse. Chaos dreadnoughts are often called hellbrutes now, to distinguish just how corrupted they've become. Imagine the same concept, a mortally wounded super soldier entombed in a machine. But remove the discipline and faith, and add the mutating, maddening influence of the warp. The result is as horrific as you'd expect. Many Chaos Dreadnought pilots eventually lose their sanity utterly. Some have been trapped in their metal coffins for 10,000 years, with only hatred and the whispers of demons for company. They rampage in battle in a state of perpetual psychotic fury. Chaos warbands literally treat them like attack dogs, locking them up between battles, often in chains or sarcophagus stasis, because otherwise they might go berserk on their own allies. When a fight is about to begin, they'll unleash the Hellbrute, pointing it at the enemy and standing back to let the thing vent its centuries of pent-up bloodlust. The physical form of a Chaos Dreadnought often reflects its corruption. The once clean lines of a Contemptor or Castraferum are warped and fused with fleshy growths and demonic visages. Tubes might spill out like entrails, armor plates corroded and spiked. Some hellbrutes graft additional limbs or weaponry in grotesque ways. The Emperor's children, hedonists of chaos, have sonic dreadnoughts that mount immense speakers and warp amplifiers, so instead of an assault cannon firing shells, it blasts demonic noise that can liquefy organs. The Death Guard's plague-infested hellbrutes ooze diseased ichor and carry batteries of slime projectors. In battle, a hellbrute is terrifying and unpredictable. It might charge headlong like a rabid beast, guns firing wildly, or sometimes its original tactical acumen flickers through and it executes disturbingly effective maneuvers, all while howling unspeakable war cries. There are a few Chaos Dreadnoughts who still retain more of their mind, becoming dark mirror images of loyal ancients. For example, Macarian, the war sage of the Night Lord's Legion, was interred in a dreadnought after the Siege of Terra. Unlike many of his peers, he kept a hold, mostly, on his sanity and tactical brilliance. He essentially acted as an advisor and occasional battering ram for his warband. In one famous incident, his warband was being torn apart by internal rivalries and hunted by other traitors. A young Night Lord officer, desperate for guidance, awoke Macarian, who had refused to be active for centuries. Macarian promptly took command and led them in a campaign that temporarily restored their fortunes. During that campaign, he confronted a Blood Angel's dreadnought named Raguel. Ironically, Raguel was a loyalist whom Macarian had actually slain in person during the Siege of Terra 10,000 years earlier, and who had later been interred in a dreadnought himself. In a grimly poetic duel, the two ancient enemies, one traitor, one loyal, both far removed from who they once were, fought again. Each essentially killed the other for a second time. Macarian was last seen collapsing after ripping Raguel's sarcophagus open. Macarian's story ended there, more or less. There are conflicting whispers that his cruel brothers dragged his remains along to try to repair him against his own wishes to die. It illustrates that a dreadnought's longevity can be as much a curse for traitors as for the faithful. Even a strong-willed traitor like Macarian eventually succumbed to an existence of unending war and woke into a galaxy that held nothing but hollow purpose for him. Another illustrative case, the hellbrute Kjarvik of the World Eaters, a traitor legion. Kjarvik was said to have moments of lucidity where he realized he was a monster and begged his fellow World Eaters to let him die. They, of course, did not. Instead, they deliberately goaded him into berserk rages because they found it useful and, frankly, entertaining. His every waking moment was pain and anger, and he had no choice but to unleash it on anyone in reach. One day, perhaps his wish was granted, and an enemy destroyed him. But who can say? The Chaos Gods take a perverse pleasure in denying final rest to their pawns. The existence of dreadnoughts, both loyal and traitor, underscores one of the core truths of Warhammer 40,000. There is only war, and it never ends. The loyalist dreadnoughts are the embodiments of duty eternal, heroes who quite literally fight beyond the grave. They're terrifying to the enemy because you cannot deter them, cannot demoralize them, and often cannot even kill them unless you obliterate them entirely. They don't feel fear or pain the way a normal being would, or rather, even if they do, it won't stop them. How do you scare someone who has already faced death and come out the other side? Good luck. If anything, it's the dreadnought who instills fear in you by showing that the Emperor's wrath is so great that not even death will make it back off. For the Space Marines themselves, dreadnoughts are a source of both great pride and a subtle, unspoken dread. Every battle brother knows, at least in theory, that he could one day be chosen for this honor. On a practical level, they all revere the ancients and would be awed to have their guidance. But in the quiet of their own hearts, some likely think, would I want that if it came to it? To never truly die, but never truly live again either? It's a heavy question. We outsiders might romanticize the dreadnought as a glorious second life, and indeed it is a form of immortality, of continued glory and service. But it's also a surrender of one's flesh and a commitment to indefinite war. Space Marines live for war, yes, but even they have moments of fellowship, of rest, of simple bodily pleasures like food or drink, or for the Space Wolves a good mug of ale. A dreadnought has none of that. Many are basically stored away until battle, in darkness, in silence. It can be argued that their existence between wars is akin to death, with only brief awakenings that might be confusing or disorienting. It's small wonder that some are grumpy or curt. Their patience for frivolity is zero. And yet, despite that somber aspect, the Space Marines consider it one of the highest honors. Because what greater act of devotion is there than to give not just your life, but your death to the Emperor? To say, even in death I still serve, as is inscribed on many dreadnought sarcophagi. In a universe assailed on all sides by horrors, heroes who won't die are as necessary as they are frightening. In the end, dreadnoughts stand as enduring symbols of the Imperium's will. They are brutal, they are relentless, and they carry within them the wisdom of ages. Enemies call them dead walkers, or the ancients, with a mix of fear and respect. Allies step a little lighter and straighten their backs when in the presence of an ancient, not out of fear but out of reverence and the desire to prove worthy of fighting alongside a legend. When a dreadnought falls, which is rare, but it does happen if the enemy is lucky and the circumstances dire, the chapter will go to extraordinary lengths to reclaim the body. Often it's not even about hoping the hero inside could be saved. If the sarcophagus is breached, the occupant usually perishes. It's about preserving his remains and the machine for proper interment and honor. Many a last stand has been fought over a downed dreadnought's chassis, with Marines willingly dying to ensure their ancient's body isn't defiled or lost. If recovery is impossible and a dreadnought is truly gone, the company or chapter affected will hold funeral rites akin to losing a founding father. To the common people of the Imperium, if they ever witness a dreadnought, it must seem like seeing one of the Emperor's avenging angels cast in metal. Many Imperial citizens live their whole lives only hearing fantastical rumors of such things. If one strides through their hive city streets one day, they probably think a god has come to save them. Perhaps in a way one has. So, dreadnoughts, the most terrifying space marines. Terrifying for the enemy, certainly, these towering engines of destruction piloted by undying heroes. But perhaps on some level, slightly terrifying for the Space Marines themselves. A reminder that their duty truly has no end, that even death is not an escape from the burden of service. Terrifying and inspiring and sobering all at once. In the grim ledger of the far future, a dreadnought is both an asset and a statement. It says to the foe, "No matter what you do, we will not yield. Kill us, and we will rise again stronger. We have heroes who will fight you even when life has left them." It says to the Imperium's people, "See the price we are willing to pay for your safety, and take heart." And to the Space Marines, it whispers, "There is always more duty to be done." Ultimately, these ironclad veterans embody the Imperium's defiance. They will continue to stand long after a normal warrior would have fallen, anchored by faith and fury. They are the bulwark that holds when all else fails, the fist that strikes when all others are broken. As long as a single noble soul is willing to inhabit those ancient metal shells, the Imperium of man will never admit defeat. In the grim darkness of the far future, even victory comes at a terrible price. Our story begins at dawn on a ruined world just wrested from the clutches of chaos. Billowing smoke clings to a broken horizon. The silhouette of a once proud city lies shattered against a blood-red sunrise. I stand amid smoldering ruins and broken idols, the acrid scent of ozone and burnt flesh heavy in the air. This is imperial liberation, harsh, absolute, and not at all the triumphant parade one might imagine. In a slightly sardonic twist, the first thing one learns about being saved by the Imperium is that it hardly feels like salvation at all. I invite you to witness what truly happens after the shooting stops, when a world's fate hangs in the balance and the real struggle for its soul begins. Some may question your right to destroy 10 billion people. Those who understand know that you have no right to let them live. Ancient proverb often attributed to the Inquisition. This planet now lies in ruin. For years it groaned under the boot of chaos, its citizens terrorized by heretic warlords and demonic nightmares. Now the Imperium has taken it back. The worst is over, or so the exhausted survivors might think. The Imperial Aquila flags rise again over blasted hab blocks, but they cast long shadows on a populace that has seen hell, and now faces the Emperor's uncompromising judgment. The day of liberation, from ashes to administratum. The final battle ended mere hours ago. The Astra Militarum regiments and Space Marines who delivered this world from chaos are still tallying their dead. In the rubble of the capital hive, ragged civilians slowly emerge from hiding like ghosts, wide-eyed, emaciated, unsure whether to cheer or cower. Here and there, clusters of survivors huddle under the watch of stern-faced Imperial guardsmen. Liberation has come, but it arrives with barked orders and leveled bolt guns. In a bitter twist of fate, the very armies that saved the people now corral them into makeshift holding camps. On the ruined cathedral square, a veteran commissar stands atop a burnt-out tank, using a magnifier to project his voice over the crowd. "Citizens, by decree of the Holy Inquisition, you are ordered to assemble for processing. Compliance is not optional." There is little rejoicing, only the shuffling of tired feet and muffled sobs. The people of this planet have traded one terror for another. Yesterday it was the Chaos Overlords. Today it is the black uniformed agents of their distant emperor. Already signs of the battle's atrocity scar every surface. Once grand statues of the God Emperor lie decapitated, replaced by obscene chaos icons that the liberators now furiously tear down. Banner poles that once flew the sigils of dark gods are being hauled down and burnt. In their place, the imperial aquila is raised high, but it flutters over a city of the dead. Piles of corpses, human and otherwise, line the main thoroughfares, awaiting disposal. Many are civilians caught in the crossfire or murdered in ritual slaughter by the heretics. Emaciated children cling to equally gaunt mothers, too numb to weep. The first relief tents appear, staffed by Medicae priests of the Adeptus Ministorum, distributing watered-down recaf and litanies of comfort. The survivors drink the tepid broth and parrot back prayers to the Emperor, unsure if they've been saved or simply conquered anew. Above, the sky is thick with Imperial Navy craft. Valkyrie airlifters roar overhead, deploying fresh platoons of armed soldiers to secure key infrastructure. The Imperial flag, a tattered, soot-stained aquila, is planted atop the ruins of the governor's palace, a symbol that Imperial order has ostensibly been restored. But on the ground, order looks more like martial law. Curfews are imposed before the first post-liberation night even falls. Anyone found wandering after dark without authorization is likely to be shot on sight. Such are the wages of freedom in the Imperium. For the common folk, fear mingles with relief. A middle-aged hab worker, face streaked with ash, whispers to her neighbor in the processing queue, "We made it. Emperor be praised, we made it." Her neighbor, a one-armed former PDF conscript who survived months of chaos labor camps, merely gives a hollow stare. He knows there's no guarantee he'll see tomorrow, even under Imperial authority. All around the newly liberated exchange wary glances. They have heard stories, dark rumors that the Inquisition sometimes cleanses worlds even after victory. Whispers spread that an exterminatus was narrowly averted, and indeed, high above in orbit, an inquisitorial ship still looms, its silos stocked with cyclonic torpedoes that could, if ordered, reduce all life below to cinders. No one will say it aloud, but every survivor wonders, will the Imperium truly let us live? The answer, at least for now, is yes, with conditions. Exterminatus is a last resort reserved only for worlds too far gone or too strategically unimportant to reclaim. Tertius is valuable, a hive world with millions of skilled hands and manufactories that the Imperium needs. The price of retaking it was high, but deemed worth paying. To simply purge it entirely would be a waste except in the most extreme scenario. And so the Inquisition has stayed its hand. The world will be purged not by orbital fire, but inch by inch on the ground. For the survivors, that means their true test is about to begin. Purging the heretic inquisitorial justice unleashed. With the guns of war silenced, a new kind of gunfire begins at dawn. Crack! A single last shot echoes down a boulevard of gutted habs. A commissar has summarily executed a man in the registration line after he muttered a prayer to the wrong emperor, perhaps a chaos-tainted one. This is the opening salvo of the Inquisition's purge. The Imperium has no intention of blindly trusting those who lived under chaos rule. Every civilian, PDF trooper, and even Imperial guardsman who fought here is now a potential suspect in the Inquisition's eyes. The logic is brutally simple. Anyone could carry the taint of chaos. The inquisitorial forces on world are led by a hard-eyed Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor, flanked by power-armored Sisters of Battle from the Ecclesiarchy and black-armored stormtroopers. They waste no time. Across every survivor camp and hive sector, loyalty screenings commence. Men and women are ordered to kneel in the rubble of the civic plaza as confessors stride down the lines swinging incense and reciting the litany of purgation. Confess, they demand. Those who hesitate or stammer out half-truths are swiftly pulled aside by inquisitorial agents for further questioning, a euphemism for torture or instant execution. In the field infirmary, an old woman whimpers in pain from a shrapnel wound. A Macarian priest tends her wounds kindly, then, with equal devotion, checks her body for any witch marks or chaos tattoos. On finding a strange symbol burned into her forearm, the mark of a forced cult branding weeks ago, the priest quietly signals a nearby Arbeits officer. The woman is gently lifted onto a stretcher and wheeled not to a recovery tent, but to a discreet execution pit behind the Medicae station. A laspistol shot ends her misery before the hour is out. Such small mercies are common now. The Imperium prefers to release the Emperor's mercy upon those even suspected of corruption. Mass purges soon follow. The Inquisitor has decreed that the entire remaining population must undergo ritual cleansing and verification. At gunpoint, thousands of survivors are marched out of the city ruins to a giant makeshift camp of barbed wire and floodlights set up in a former agri-zone. Arcoflagellants, horrific cyborg penitents, prowl the perimeters, twitching and reciting scripture in distorted metallic voices. Overhead, servo-skull drones, floating human skulls fitted with cameras and loudspeakers, blare pre-recorded warnings. Shelter in designated areas. Any unauthorized movement will be met with lethal force. Praise be the God Emperor. Inside the camp, the process is methodical and pitiless. Each refugee is catalogued by the administratum scribe's name, former occupation, any known association with the heretic regime. Fingerprints and gene scans are taken. Those with abnormal readings or mutations, even minor ones, like unusual eye coloration or extra digits, are separated immediately. We see one young man, a former factory worker, flagged for having a tiny vestigial horn on his skull, likely a mutation from warp exposure. He pleads that he was born with it, that he hid it all his life to avoid the heretic's attention. His cries fall on deaf ears as he's dragged to the sanctuary pens. In less polite terms, these are mass execution holding areas. Not all can be saved, the Inquisition reasons, and any who show signs of warp touch must be dealt with. The rationale echoes grim imperial doctrine. Better to kill a few now than risk countless later. Indeed, one imperial commander famously put it thus after a similar war. Better to sterilize or kill millions on suspicion of chaos taint than to have to eventually kill billions to prevent its spread. Such cold calculus is being applied ruthlessly here. In the camp's makeshift courthouses, little more than administratum prefab shelters, impromptu tribunals try case after case in assembly line fashion. A scribe reads charges. A robed inquisitorial interrogator peers intently, perhaps aided by a psyker to sense guilt. Verdicts are swift. Guilty. Corrupt. Tainted. Guilty. The punishment is almost always death or lifelong servitude. Occasionally, someone is found redeemable, usually meaning they are sent to a penal workforce or mind-wiped for reprogramming rather than executed outright. We watch as a middle-aged man, a former city administrator who survived by collaborating, under duress, with the Chaos Governor, begs for mercy. He insists he sabotaged the heretics whenever he could, that he secretly saved imperial records from destruction. The interrogator listens, impassive. Without a word, she nods to a silent Adeptus Astartes in gray power armor looming in the corner. A gray knight's space marine, blade in hand. In one clean stroke, the man's head is lopped off. The Inquisition's judgment is final. There will be no lengthy appeals or investigations. Mercy is a rarity. Certainty of guilt is not required when lives are at stake. As harsh as it seems, this approach follows the Inquisition's long-standing policy. If there is even a chance an individual has been compromised by the ruinous powers, it's far safer to eliminate them than to risk a hidden corruption festering. In countless historical incidents, when Imperial forces encounter demons or chaos, surviving witnesses are often executed or mind-wiped en masse for precisely this reason. Congratulations, dear survivors. You have been deemed fortunate enough to avoid exterminatus. Instead, you get to prove your innocence under pain of death. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Purge is its clinical thoroughness. Every building and tunnel of the city is being scoured. Teams of armed inquisitorial stormtroopers move block by block, flamer units in hand, burning any blasphemous texts, idols, or chaos shrines left behind. In the shattered Grand Library, piles of books and data slates that were tainted with heretical lore are set alight. The crackling flames consume knowledge both foul and fair. The Imperium would rather burn a world's entire history than let a single scrap of chaos scripture remain. Deep in the Underhive, Adeptus Arbite's shock teams hunt surviving chaos cultists who fled the battle. We follow one such raid in our mind's eye. Arbites, clad in heavy carapace armor, kicking down a rusted hatch to reveal a hidden shrine where a dozen starved cultists are hiding. The cultists shriek praises to dark gods and lunge with makeshift blades. It's over in seconds. Shotgun blasts and power mauls silence the den. No prisoners are taken. The Arbites systematically incinerate the corpses, heads removed and burned separately, as per the Codex procedures to prevent any lingering demonic influence in the bodies. They mark the site with a red X symbol, indicating the area has been cleansed. Multiply this scene by hundreds across the planet. Chaos nests rooted out one by one. Amid the carnage, a peculiar ritual plays out with each purge. Before an execution or structured demolition, a priest of the ecclesiarchy is always present to recite rites of purification. We see an Adeptus Ministorum confessor raising a gilded Aquila icon as a traitor regiment's survivors are lined up for the firing squad. "By the Emperor's light, may your souls be pardoned in death," he intones. The prisoners, some sobbing, some defiant, are then mown down by a volley of lasfire. Immediately after, servitors move in to douse the bodies and the firing wall with holy consecrated oils. The message: even in killing, the Imperium seeks to purify. It is grisly, yes, but it is also dogmatic. In the eyes of the faithful, these extreme measures aren't cruelty, they are salvation. History provides precedent for all of this. The First War for Armageddon is a classic example often cited in hushed whispers by Imperial officials. After that world was saved from a demon primarch, the Inquisition conducted sweeping purges of the population. Entire hive cities were evacuated under false pretenses, told they were being moved for their safety, only to be sterilized or imprisoned in labor camps out of fear that chaos taint lurked among them. Millions of loyal soldiers who fought bravely were sequestered and slated for processing, just like on Tertius. For the common imperial citizen, being a hero offers no immunity from suspicion. The same fate can await the liberator and the liberated if either has been touched by the enemy. On Solus Tertius, this means even some of the planetary defense forces, PDF who resisted chaos are under the microscope. Those PDF troopers who survived the war are disarmed and segregated in a different holding pen. They thought they'd be lauded as freedom fighters. Instead, they face interrogations about why they didn't die to the last man. If you lived while others perished, perhaps the dark gods spared you for a reason. An inquisitorial acolyte sneers at them. It's a cruel accusation. These soldiers fought valiantly for the Emperor, but doubt is the Inquisition's bread and wine. Until proven beyond any doubt, no one is above suspicion. There is, however, a hierarchy in the Purge. Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes who took part in the liberation are largely exempt from local inquisitorial trials. The Inquisition trusts the chapters to self-scrutinize, and indeed, some chapters have their own secret rites to purge any chaos influence. The few Space Marines still planetside, likely doing last sweeps for any surviving chaos champions, receive curt respect from the Inquisitor. After all, it was the Astartes who made victory possible. One can sense a tense undercurrent, though. The Grey Knights, those mysterious demon-hunting Space Marines, are rumored to be present, and if they are, no one, not even fellow Imperial forces, is entirely safe from purging. The Grey Knights have a dark reputation for mind-wiping or eliminating Imperial allies who witness their battles against the warp, to keep the secrets of chaos and the chapter itself hidden. In one corner of the starport, a cadre of battle-weary Imperial Guard troopers who had unknowingly fought alongside Grey Knights against a summoned demon are quietly led away by black-armored figures. Moments later, distant explosions rock an isolated section of the camp, an accidental ammo detonation, the official report will say. Those guardsmen were likely disposed of for their own good, a fate not uncommon in inquisitorial cleanup operations. As the purge rages on, a palpable atmosphere of terror mixed with grim resolution blankets the planet. "We have saved you," the Imperium declares, "but now you must be worthy of salvation." The survivors internalize this message quickly. Some respond by over-demonstrating their piety and loyalty, hoping to escape scrutiny. Everywhere you look, weary people press their hands together and shout praises to the Emperor with cracked voices, as if sheer zeal can erase any suspicion of heresy. Parents force their traumatized children to recite the catechisms of faith before the roving inquisitorial patrols arrive. Better the child stumbles over a holy verse now, in private, than in front of an interrogator who might take a mistake as evidence of impiety. Under the watchful gaze of skull probes and bolter-armed sisters, neighbors turn on neighbors in a bid to appear righteous. "I saw her speaking to a demon," one woman suddenly shrieks, pointing at her lifelong friend. The accused friend, eyes wide in betrayal, vehemently denies it. Who is telling the truth? It hardly matters. The friend is dragged off by Sisters of Battle for investigation, and the accuser crosses herself, loudly proclaiming, "I serve only the Golden Throne." In this atmosphere, false accusations fester, but ironically, the Inquisition doesn't mind. Better that 100 innocents are denounced than one traitor goes unnoticed. The few actual Chaos collaborators who remain hidden attempt to blend in with the frenzy of devotion. But the irony is that the most fanatical displays of zeal often invite the Inquisition's hardest scrutiny. It's a deadly tightrope. Appear too reluctant, you're a heretic. Appear too devout, maybe you're overcompensating, also heretical. The average citizen has never navigated such a perilous test of loyalty. Many simply break under the pressure, confessing to crimes they never committed, implicating others just in the desperate hope of appeasing their inquisitors. This is chaos in its own way, not the arch-enemy's warp-spawned insanity, but the orderly chaos of imperial justice, where fear and paranoia run rampant under the thin guise of law and faith. Yet, cruel as it is, it's working. Within weeks, the organized chaos resistance on Solus Tertius is obliterated. Cult leaders are dead or in chains, hidden shrines are reduced to ashes, and no whisper of heresy dares slip past the lips of the surviving populace. The planet is being purged of both sin and sinner. As an imperial commentator, I must note that while history records these events in sanitized terms like comprehensive pacification or post-battle chastisement, living through it is another matter entirely. The people of Tertius, those that survive this purge, will never forget the dual horror of occupation and liberation. They have looked into the eyes of monsters and also into the eyes of those sent to save them. And in both, they found an unsparing ruthlessness. In the end, as night falls on this day of reckoning, thousands lie dead by imperial hands. Yet, the Inquisition deems the operation a success. The cancer is cut away. The survivors in the camps are exhausted, terrified, but ostensibly pure, or at least too scared to ever admit otherwise. Thus concludes the first phase of reclaiming a world from chaos. Purge and purify by blade and bolter. Tomorrow will bring reconstruction and redemption, but only because today the judgment of the Emperor was carried out without mercy. The Vox casters crackle across the camp with a final nightly benediction. The Emperor's work is done this day. Sleep in his light, lest darkness find you again. It's doubtful anyone sleeps soundly in those floodlit pens, but at least for the first time in memory, the howls of demons and traitors are absent from the night. They have been replaced by the stern lullaby of imperial order, a fearful quiet broken only by distant hymns and the crackle of funeral pyres. Cleansing the taint tech priests and terraformation. At first light, new figures in crimson robes descend upon the ravaged cities and poisoned wilds of Solus Tertius. These are the emissaries of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, and they have come to perform their own brand of purification. While the Inquisition roots out living heresy, the Mechanicus addresses the physical and technological corruption left in chaos's wake. Their censor mechadendrites swinging incense, and their monotone voices reciting the ritual of cleansing. Every machine, every data cogitator, every vehicle that was touched by the heretics is suspect. The Mechanicus adepts scan the broken forges with arrays of blinking auspex devices. They detect traces of warp contamination. Perhaps the heretics had inscribed profane runes on the assembly lines or infected the logic engines with scrap code demonic viruses. The senior Magos clacks in binary cant to his subordinates, and they spring into action. Robot servitors lumber forward carrying promethium tanks and plasma cutters. With a great hiss, they begin melting down corrupted machinery to slag right on the spot. The tech priests intone prayers as molten metal pools at their feet. Purify the steel, sanctify the forge, they chant. Any corrupted buildings, war gear, or common machinery is not spared. If it was touched by chaos, it is to be unmade utterly, reduced to raw materials that can later be recast anew. The idea is simple. Better to destroy and rebuild than to risk one cog of chaos taint remaining. We observe the fate of a once mighty plasma reactor deep in the city's core. This reactor powered half the hive. Now its conduits are wrapped in spiked chains and 8-pointed star sigils left by the heretics. The Mechanicus declares it perditus extremis, beyond saving. Workers in heavy hazard suits move in, placing melter bombs at key support struts. Boom! The entire reactor is brought down in a controlled implosion, sending a column of dust and vaporized metal into the sky. The Mechanicus overseers record the event in their logs with detached satisfaction. They will build a new reactor in time, one free of defilement. Outside the city, the planet's soil itself bears scars of corruption. In one region, the heretics performed dark rituals that turned the once fertile fields into withered, blighted land. Sickly purple vegetation, mutated by warp energy, chokes the landscape. The Mechanicus' Magos Biologis contingent arrives to address this. They dispatch bio-cleansers, specialized servitor drones that crawl across the ground, spraying clouds of neutralizing agents. The soil smokes as these holy chemicals do their work. Contaminated topsoil is excavated by massive crawler machines, which then incinerate it in mobile plasma furnaces. It's a form of geopurification. In extreme cases, the Mechanicus might even alter the environment on a large scale, a miniature terraformation effort to undo Chaos's damage. If Chaos turned rivers to literal blood or the air to poisonous fog, the tech priests will set up atmospheric scrubbers and blessed filtration units. They may seed the clouds with reagents to precipitate pure rain and flush out pollutants. They treat the planet as one vast wounded machine in need of repair. One striking scene unfolds in the central plaza of the capital, where a massive warp portal had briefly been opened during the war. Although the portal was closed, it left an ugly scar in reality, an area of unnatural cold and flickering light with gravity slightly askew. The Mechanicus, in cooperation with the Ordo Malleus Inquisition, cordons off this zone with hexagrammic wards, powerful anti-demonic symbols etched onto towering pylons. A coven of sanctioned psychers is brought in under heavy guard. Their task is to perform a planetary exorcism of sorts, an echo of legendary events like the exorcism of Opridia, where 1,000,000 demon hosts were cast out by combined inquisitorial and Astartes efforts. Here, fortunately, no demons remain, only a wound in the fabric of reality. The psychers form a circle and begin chanting the rites of detestation, forbidden rituals known only to a few, famously used by the Exorcist's Space Marine chapter in such dire cases. As they chant, the very air shimmers. Regular humans feel nauseated standing near. A couple of guardsmen vomit or faint from the psychic backlash. But after several hours, the warp scar recedes. The eerie lights fade, the temperature normalizes. When the psychers are done, some lie dead from the strain, their eyes burned out. But the lingering echo of the warp is gone. The area is immediately sanctified. A troop of sororitas, sisters of battle, marches through swinging incense and singing hymns, driving out any last shadows of the Imperium. The Adeptus Mechanicus also pays keen attention to STC fragments, or any technology the heretics tampered with. If the Chaos occupation led to modifications of machinery, perhaps dark tech heresy, like integrating demonic components or forbidden Xenos tech, the Mechanicus will have a dual response. Recover and study anything novel, but destroy anything too corrupted. We glimpse a moment in a ruined research facility. A tech priest gingerly picks up a twisted piece of circuitry that once belonged to a dark mechanicum device. He examines it with mechanized eyes. Though it's heretical, it might hold knowledge. Likely he'll have it shipped off-world to the Mechanicus forges, where radical tech priests can analyze it under quarantine. In secret, the Mechanicus hates to waste knowledge, even forbidden knowledge, but they'll never admit to studying it openly. Meanwhile, anything blatantly tainted, say a cogitator that screams with a bound demon inside, is thoroughly destroyed. There are cases in lore where entire vaults of archaeotech were sealed or nuked because Chaos had touched them. The Mechanicus on Solus will not hesitate to do the same if needed. Let's not forget the looming environmental toll of both the war and the purge. The heretics may have unleashed toxins or summoned warp-spawned creatures that ravaged the ecosystem. In one Agri hamlet, villagers whisper that the local well water turned to blood during the occupation, a literal manifestation of chaos. To fix such horrors, the Mechanicus employ magos hydrologists to cleanse water sources. We see them dumping vats of alchemical reagents into the poisoned wells, their servo skulls taking water samples every hour to gauge improvement. Gradually, the water clears of its crimson stain, though no one who saw that miracle of blood will ever trust a drink from that well again. Terraforming on a post-war world can also mean reintroducing life where needed. If certain regions were scorched or rendered barren by exterminatus light actions like viral bombardment or heavy ordnance, the Imperium might attempt to regrow them. For a hive world like Solus Tertius, the priority is less on nature and more on making zones habitable for industry and habitation again. Still, Mechanicus biologists release hardy fungi and algae strains into the soil, life forms engineered to absorb pollutants and produce oxygen, a first step to rehabilitating the environment. In the upper atmosphere, swarms of maintenance servitors, some resembling mechanized birds, disperse chemicals to patch the ozone and clear the lingering clouds of war. One cannot overlook the symbolic acts of cleansing, too. The ecclesiarchy often works alongside the Mechanicus here. For instance, consider the great Chaos Temple that the heretics built from the bones of the city's imperial church. Standing 30 meters tall, made of cracked marble and stained with innocent blood, it's an affront to all that is holy. The tech priests could easily implode it, but the ecclesiarchy insists on a ritual demolition. So, a procession of priests and faithful, survivors deemed pure enough to participate, approaches the profane structure at noon. They carry with them a revered relic, perhaps a shard of a saint's bone, and as they circle the temple, they chant the rite of castigation. "Not one stone upon another shall remain," the head cardinal proclaims, "for this house was built on blasphemy." At the final shout of "Imperator Volt," the emperor wills it. Demolition charges are triggered. The Chaos Temple collapses in a thunderous roar, dust billowing. The watching crowd, survivors and soldiers alike, cries tears of relief and joy as the spiked towers and grinning gargoyles crumble to dust. In the Debris place, the ecclesiarchy immediately plants a tall wooden cross bearing the aquila and a banner that reads Puritas. It's a temporary marker, but a promise. A new cathedral will rise here one day. But not yet. First, the ground itself will be reconsecrated. The rubble is carted off, piece by piece, to be dumped into a sunken pit and incinerated with promethium. No trace of the enemy's monuments can remain. The Adeptus Mechanicus are ostensibly engineers, but their every action is shrouded in ritual and superstition. To the lay observer, it looks like priests exorcising a demon from a machine, and essentially that's exactly what it is. Logic and mysticism meld in the 41st millennium. When a tech priest declares a sector clear of physical taint, a confessor stands beside him to declare it spiritually clean as well. Only then can reconstruction truly begin. Now, post-war rebuilding can properly commence on cleared ground. We watch as servitor labor crews, mindless cyborg workers, move in to clear wreckage that's been blessed and approved for reuse. Gigantic cranes, themselves anointed with purity seals, lift girders and rock-crete chunks, forming piles of raw materials. Reclamator units sift through to salvage anything structurally sound. Resource reallocation kicks in. Intact steel beams from collapsed habs will be melted down to forge new ones. Promethium fuel caches seized from the enemy are repurposed to power imperial generators. The administratum, always thinking of the ledger, has dispatched Masters to calculate how the ruins might contribute to imperial needs. For example, if vast swaths of the population died, which they did, there may now be a surplus of stored food or water that can be shipped off-world to nearby war fronts. Or the opposite. If farms are scorched, aid shipments might be requested from other systems to prevent mass starvation in the short term. Amid the city, the Astra Militarum Engineering Corps assists the Mechanicus in certain tasks. They erect prefab field shelters to house survivors whose homes were destroyed, at least until more permanent housing is built, or until they're shipped elsewhere. In a show of pragmatic compassion, some Imperial Guard units set up field kitchens, serving ration gruel to both soldiers and civilians. This isn't purely benevolent. A fed populace is less likely to riot or cause trouble during the purges and reconstruction. Still, to a starving child, a bowl of synth-nutrient soup from a guardsman is a godsend. We see an officer pat a child's head awkwardly as she wolfs down her first full meal in weeks. The officer offers a rare smile and a devotional pamphlet. Both sustenance and the imperial creed must be distributed liberally now. Beyond the city, the Mechanicus also addresses infrastructure. Bridges blown out by fighting are quickly replaced with temporary spans flown in from orbit. The railway lines that transport ore and goods, sabotaged by retreating cultists, are being repaired by long trains of servitors that automatically lay new track. Adeptus Mechanicus Logis. Engines analyze the planet's production facilities, marking which can be brought back online soon and which must be rebuilt from scratch. The goal is clear: restore the planet's contribution to the Imperium as quickly as possible. On Solus Tertius, that means hive factories turning out lost gunpowder packs and armor plate for the Imperial Guard. Every day they remain offline is a day the war effort elsewhere suffers. Thus the tech priests work without rest, plugging themselves into data ports, communing with the machine spirits to soothe their trauma from Chaos's violation. One poignant scene: a senior Magos Mechanicus stands before a shattered Night Titan hangar. Inside lies the wreck of a noble Imperial Nightwalker, fallen in battle against a demon engine. The Magos extends a mechadendrite to touch the knight's hull reverently. In binary, he whispers, "Fear not, blessed engine. We will rebuild you." It's not just sentiment. The Imperium truly will recover and repair such war machines if possible. Parts are catalogued. Tech adepts swarm over the husk. Perhaps one day that knight's chassis will stride to war again, its machine spirit purged of the shame of defeat. As the cleansing phase wraps up, Tertius looks oddly both worse and better. Huge sections of cities have been leveled intentionally, creating even more rubble. But what remains standing is, at last, free of blasphemy. The air is cleaner, except for ash from funeral pyres. Rivers run clear, except where clogged with debris that engineers are filtering out. The sky's unnatural war storm clouds disperse, revealing a pale sun. The planet is scarred, but healing begins. The Mechanicus declares the physical taint of chaos purged to the extent mortally possible. They will remain to monitor for any recurrence geosensors, and Auspex arrays will stay planted across key sites to watch for anomalous readings, ready to alert if, Emperor forbid, any resurgence of warp energy is detected. In the end, the cleansing of a reclaimed world is as total as the Imperium can make it. Not just the people, but the very stones and soil have been judged, and if necessary, purged by flame or acid. The Ordo Malleus might phrase it as exorcising the demons, and the Mechanicus as reformatting the system. But either way, the motto stands: leave no trace of chaos unscathed. Thus, With the heretical filth scoured away physically and spiritually, the stage is set for the next movement in this grand, grim symphony: reconstruction and re-education. The world has been cleansed by blood and fire. Now it must be rebuilt and brought back into the imperial fold. Rebuilding faith, the ecclesiarchy's holy crusade. Even as the smoke of battle clears and the crackle of purge fires dies down, a new sound rises over Solus Tertius: the peal of bells and the chorus of hymns. The Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy of the imperial church, moves to center stage. If the Mechanicus cleansed the world's body, the ecclesiarchy will cleanse its soul. They descend in force: dour confessors, silver-tongued missionaries, and armored sisters of battle, adepta sororitas, carrying icons and relics. Portable shrines are erected on street corners, still littered with shell casings. Makeshift altars adorn the camps where survivors huddle. The message is clear: the Emperor is here, through his church, to reclaim the hearts of the people. The first Sunday after liberation is declared a day of reconsecration. All surviving citizens are commanded, for their own good, naturally, to attend mass prayer at dawn. Picture this: under the open sky, the grand cathedrals are all in ruins after all. Tens of thousands of people kneel on the broken ground of the capital's main square. Many still wear the same dirty, blood-stained clothes from the war. Some are bandaged, leaning on crutches. Surrounded by the blackened shells of government buildings, they await the sermon. At the front, atop the rubble that once was the planetary governor's statue, an ecclesiarchy cardinal stands flanked by torchbearers. He is resplendent in robes of pure white and scarlet, a contrast to the ashen scene, holding aloft a massive golden aquila symbol. His voice amplified by a choir of servo-skulls, the cardinal leads them in the litany of thanksgiving. "Praise be to the God Emperor, who in his mercy delivered you from evil," he cries. The crowd responds, weakly at first, then louder. "Praise be to him." This call and response continues, the cardinal's tone swelling with fiery passion. He speaks of the planet's fall as a punishment for straying from the Emperor's light, and its reclamation as a testament to the Emperor's forgiveness, if his people prove worthy. Then comes a crucial ritual: the reaffirmation of faith. One by one, survivors are invited, which is to say required, to come forward and swear an oath of loyalty to the Emperor and abjure chaos in all forms. A weary mother carrying an infant steps up. She's shaking. Perhaps her husband consorted with the heretics to keep their family safe, a fact she has desperately hidden. The cardinal gently places a hand on her head and asks her to repeat, "I reject the dark. I embrace the light. My soul is the Emperor's, now and forever." Tears stream down her face as she echoes the words. With a smile, he blesses her child with a touch of holy water on the brow. That baby will be baptized into the imperial creed on this day, effectively washing away the taint of being born under chaos rule. Another man comes, a former PDF trooper with haunted eyes. "Do you repent of any doubt, any heresy you harbored?" the confessor demands of him. The soldier hesitates. He did curse the Emperor in a moment of despair during the occupation. Terrified, he blurts out, Yes, I repent it." The confessor nods to a sororitas sister who produces a red-hot brand from a brazier. Quick as lightning, they sear a small aquila symbol onto the man's forearm. He cries out in pain, but also relief. This mark indicates he has been forgiven through suffering. The faithful around him applaud haltingly. It's understood that this was both penance and proof. Proof that pain means purity. Many others will line up for similar treatment, some out of genuine guilt, others in a performative show of zeal to remove any lingering doubt about their loyalty. The ecclesiarchy doesn't stop at ceremonies. They begin a comprehensive program of re-education. The administratum sets up re-indoctrination camps, separate from the Inquisition's interrogation camps. In these large tents and prefab habs, citizens attend daily sessions where priests and instructors teach the truth according to imperial doctrine. Massive banners with the emperor's image, stern yet benevolent, hang on every wall. The curriculum is simple. The imperial creed, the righteousness of the emperor, the infallibility of his rule, the evil of chaos, and the destiny of mankind to suffer and triumph in his name. Those raised under imperial rule will recognize these as basic tenets, but remember, an entire generation on this planet may have been fed lies by chaos. They must effectively be deprogrammed. We peek into a re-education class. A stern deacon stands at a chalkboard scrawled with the opening lines of the Lectitio Divinitatis, the holy book about the emperor's divinity. Dozens of youths, ages, perhaps 12 to 16, are seated on the floor, as any chairs were likely burnt or broken. These children lived their formative years under chaos occupation. Some were taught to venerate dark gods. Now, they're told all that was false. Some listen eagerly. Kids are adaptable. Many are just happy the war is over. But a few frown, confused or sullen. The deacon asks a boy, "Who is your savior?" The correct answer is, "The emperor of mankind." The boy hesitates. He remembers his parents secretly praying to some other deity for deliverance. Perhaps he even murmurs that name. Immediately, two hulking sisters hospitaller, the non-militant sisters specializing in healing and correction, step forward and drag him out. The class is told he's going for special catechism. The lesson is clear to all. There is only one correct faith here. Those taken for special catechism experience something rather Orwellian, a mix of hypnosis, psycho-conditioning, and good old fear. In small chambers, they might be strapped to a chair, forced to watch imagery of imperial saints and chaos demons flashing in sequence, with electric shocks delivered when the chaos symbols appear, and soothing music when the emperor appears. It's crude, but across the Imperium, these methods have been used to instill reflexive hatred of heresy. After a few days, that boy will break down, sobbing, begging to serve the emperor. Only then he is returned to class, often to show off his newfound fervor as an example. Adults undergo their own indoctrination rituals. Work gangs clearing rubble sing synchronized hymns